My name at this juncture is unimportant. I will likely reveal it at a later point in time, but for the meantime, John Smith will be a suitable alias. Before I reveal to you some of the files I have archived, I will need to explain to you a bit more about myself and why I am doing this. Hopefully this will grant you a bit better insight into myself. I am, for lack of a better word, a sociopath. But unlike the ones with poor impulse control and self-destructive behavior, I have ingrained into me at a young age proper life skills by my father after he caught me standing over the fourth cat I had killed. It was not out of malice. I doubt it was even curiosity, and I am not trying to make an awful pun. I just did it. He demanded to know the reason for my actions, and I explained that the cat had started to follow me, and I found it annoying. When I asked if I had done anything wrong, there was shock in his eyes, as I have later come to realize. He explained to me that the cats I had killed were beloved pets of other families who would want to know where they went. I didn't understand why this was so important, but his urgency in his voice made the impression that, while I may not have cared, other people would. "Are they going to throw me in jail?" I asked. He looked at me for a moment. "No, John. I won't, but I need you to understand why you act this way, and I will teach you how to blend in with the rest of the world. Your actions could have dire consequences for your life if you do not maintain control, so I will teach you. It will be difficult, but the lessons are valuable." In short, he trained me like I was an army private. Strict timetable, strict punishment. Constant drills into theoretical situations, but he was never aggressive. There were times when I could see the predatory mindset he might not have even been aware of would try to push through, but he kept it in check. Being on a military base most of my life, the discipline was familiar. Eventually, I would join the army, and I did fairly well. While I did not understand why others did, I was aware that they would have motivations. The rest of my life was, I believe, mundane. Nothing of significance really appeared to mind, but then again, it is not like I have a good point of comparison. I was 8 years into my service. I was acknowledged as a capable soldier who was dependable. One night, during a night exercise in a country that I cannot speak of due to certain laws, my unit was performing reconnaissance. Potential intruder was sighted. We were to verify the identity. 6 soldiers walked into the forest that night. Only I walked out, and it is the only truly definitive point in my recent years. Deep into the forest, we were in standard search formation. Jacobs heard a crack of wood breaking and signaled us to halt. As our eyes swept around to locate the source, a rushing being charged into our line and took Hill. The scream was shortened by a loud crack. His neck was broken. Tommy went to investigate, but was dragged into the woods before anyone could countermand his actions. "Open fire?" I asked softly. "Negative. Our people might still be in there." Knives were drawn, and by that time another soldier was dragged, screaming into the woods. 3 soldiers left, and the discipline was diminishing. "To hell with it," grumbled Erickson behind me. As soon as the movement was heard, Erickson fired. We watched as the bullets hit the creature, but no wounds were visible. This tall, lanky creature slammed its fist into Erickson's head with a crunch noise that I cannot describe. I was grabbed and thrown to the side. My head smacked into the tree, and I was dazed. I could barely hear gunfire and growls that sounded more than bestial, if that makes sense. Shaking my head, I pushed myself upright. The gun was useless, and this being was far too quick and strong to be human, but did not match any known animal I'm aware of at that point in time. Rustling could be heard around me for 3 very tense minutes. They seemed to lead deeper into the woods. I was prepping to head in to verify the status of my men when I felt it standing behind me. "Empty," it said. This pale creature looking into me with presumably sunken eyes, revealing what looked like black eyes. The image of a piece of meat at the butcher's dangling by one of those large hooks immediately popped into mind. "Empty," it repeated. Then it turned around and slipped away. I couldn't move or act. Distant noises indicated that it was walking away, but the pace seemed more deliberate, like it was dragging my men. I left the forest, heading back to the base. After intense debriefing and threats of court-martial, I was allowed to remain an active soldier while undergoing therapy. Mental breakdown was the official diagnosis, while that unit was deemed MIA. They sent out 4 units to locate my old unit. 3 people returned, husks of who they once were. When I got the chance to lock eyes, we nodded once. We knew. After my service, I left and decided to further investigate the cryptid phenomenon. During this time, I would find the entity that killed my unit and several other soldiers. The Wendigo. My theory about the Wendigo hunger isn't that it seeks human meat to survive, but humanity. The human soul is what it seeks. Knowing it lost it when it consumed human flesh, it considers that it might regain it the same way, not realizing it is the act itself that will doom it to remaining a Wendigo. No longer an active soldier, I researched the cryptids, but I went further than most enthusiasts. I spoke with another soldier who asks to remain nameless about the Deepweb and the best way to browse it. He explains to me the nature of some of the sites in the dark web, but I explained that I wasn't seeking that, but the back channels, the Deepweb. He gave me a copy of his custom browser, which he dubbed The Fly, because it was small and looked seemingly inconsequential. It could flit past the red rooms and the likely to go deep. He explained the setup, and I thanked him. After setup, I went into the dark side of the internet. I was testing the program out, and it worked perfectly. A few red rooms were displaying their entertainment, and I was able to slip past most of the admins. One was particularly aggressive in his actions, but the setup for this program made IP tracing a pointless endeavor. I don't understand the complexities, but I know that person and trust their work. So I plunged into the depths of the deep web, seeking government declassified documents and the like, and stumbled across a forum of coroners. Unlike other coroners, they didn't deal with murder, suicide, or mundane mysteries. Their victims were all cryptid or supernaturally related. I mentioned my interest in their jobs and explained I sought answers. The users were not happy with my presence, but when I explained my encounter with the Wendigo, they actually recognized me. Apparently, certain reports from psychiatrists could make it to them if certain words were used, and the doctor did not suspect subterfuge. They offered a deal. I archived some of their cases, and I would learn about what happens to my unit. They didn't seem to have a problem if I was to release most of the details to the public, but they warned that most people would not accept the surreality of the world. But if I could garner some interest, they would allow it, as long as personal details were omitted. I would come to understand later on, but I agreed. Having spoken with some of the morticians in the forum page, they asked that any name is to be withheld, locations were to be generalized, and make sure no government agency was aware of my action. I agreed, and they showed me the case on my unit. Case file: Wendigo Milvat, number 0261. After consolidating the reports with the lone survivor of the event and the autopsies on the recovered military personnel bodies, the following is a fairly accurate recollection of the events. At 0016 hours, the military unit was sent to investigate the reports of an intruder. This was a training exercise to judge the capabilities of a lone survivor as a team leader. Approximately at 0039 hours, the MIL unit had an auditory reconnaissance of Wendigo, number 0183. Estimated identity of cryptid is John Sampson, a hunter who went missing around 1703. Recovered body, Private Jacobs reported a branch snapping. the mill unit halted and tried to locate the source of the sound. Around 0040 hours, Wendigo number 0183 charged the unit and snatched Private Second Class Hill, snapping his neck. Private Tommy went to investigate, but was grabbed by the claws of Wendigo number 0183, and his throat was slashed. Specialist Jameson was dragged under another bush. Claw marks indicate his death was slower, as the lungs were punctured multiple times. Private Second Class Erickson was able to shoot Wendigo number 0183 when it charged the group again. As multiple previous cases have established, standard ammunition fails to leave a true impact on the body of a Wendigo. Further evidence that older Wendigo are virtually immune to small arms fire. Erickson was killed immediately when his skull was impacted from the top, severing the spinal cord and crushing the throat vertically. Lone survivor was knocked aside. Estimate's time duration for encounter with Wendigo number 0183 is 3 minutes. Acting Corporal Jenkins' body was never recovered. Of special note in this case, this is one of the first times that the cryptid in question spoke in response to the presence of the survivor. The word empty is confusing, as Wendigo are traditionally voracious in their pursuit of human flesh. Autopsy summary of Erickson, Jacobs, Tomey, and Jameson. Erickson, fractured skull from overhead strike from cryptid. Catastrophic damage to the neck and throat area due to the force of the impact. Severing of the spinal cord implies death was instantaneous. Jacobs, multiple stab wounds from the claws of the cryptid. Secondary infection was not able to infect the body. Body was still cremated as per protocol, as was Tomey. Tomey, throat slashed by the claws of the cryptid. Note, this is the same Tomey who witnessed the encounter of the police officer who encountered Skinwalker, Michigan Sub-Territory Number 4. Said police officer also reported on the mush corpse in the vehicle. The 2 deceased military personnel names Hill and Jenkins were not recovered, likely taken as food by Wendigo number 0183. Judging by the enforced counseling sessions for the survivor, it seems unlikely he willingly caused the incident. Reading over the case file, I tried to figure out the implications of the things that caught my attention. Had these people really figured out who the Wendigo was, or was it just guesswork? Had there been enough encounters for the filing system to be displayed in the way you saw it? I was aware Tomey was given the choice of enlistment or prison. It makes me wonder if the incident they referred to was the same case that caused him to make that decision. Why are skinwalkers designated by territories? Could it be that, given their ability to shapeshift, makes it impossible to identify who they originally were? The mush corpse is not a reference I'm familiar with. While I could imagine why it was called that way, the term mush seems overkill. But given the wealth of resources I have access to, I chose to see what these morticians and their network have concluded regarding Wendigo. Wendigo, humanoid cryptid. While we have been unable to locate the first known Wendigo, we have concluded that the original story of these beings is more fact than fiction. Wendigo are humans who, after prolonged starvation, consume human flesh, and in the process are cursed by something which causes their transformation. The transformation is an approximate growth of limbs by 22%, and the fingernails elongate, sharpen, and harden to assist in catching more humans to consume. Why the Wendigo feels the need to consume human flesh is not readily apparent. It is speculated that it is the only meat that satiates their never-ending hunger. After consuming human flesh of a sufficient quality, older Wendigo requiring more, they return to a place of significance for them and hibernate for years. Fire seems to be the bane of these creatures, as it makes holding off the younger ones a more viable tactic. However, Wendigo who are over 2 centuries old seem to ignore the heat of the flames and ignore it as a stalling tactic. Weaponizing it against the Wendigo is the far superior option. However, most people, when facing cryptids, seem to leave their rational minds behind, as they see something truly abhorrent to them and seldom take the time to mull through the problem. Given that Wendigo gain in strength and speed, it is understood why humans rarely have the time to plan. Cases involving firearms were conflicting until it was deduced that younger Wendigo were vulnerable to small arms fire until their bodies matured to resist calibers smaller than a .22. Very few encounters have involved active military personnel, so judging that firepower is difficult unless more encounters were had. Knives are an effective, if foolish, idea for Wendigos who are less than a century old. Their behavior indicates that they shun civilization. Reasons why are speculative. The information was illuminating. Hopefully this will be of benefit to you all. If there are any other cryptids that you wish to know about, or unusual deaths, please let me know, and I will try to locate the approximate case file. Case file. Dogman, civilian, number 0819. Initial victim is an autistic male of 9 years old. Severe anxiety around strangers. Communicative abilities restricted to barely legible writing in a large diary. Secondary victim is the child's mother. Father's whereabouts are unknown, not important in this case. 3 weeks prior to the incident, she purchased an emotional support animal to see if it would alleviate her child's anxiety issues. Location is a lifestyle block in the state of Montana. The land is family-owned and was seldom in use. Financial information was further obtained in the process of our investigations into the event, and deemed inconsequential, but recorded for the sake of necessity. The initial victim was content to be left alone, but according to the counseling adhered to by the mother, she felt this would hamper the social development of the child. Records from these counseling sessions indicated that the counselor would explain that due to the levels of anxiety the child exhibits in social situations, there would be little chance of future development. The counselor did gently coax the mother into acquiring an emotional support animal that the child might feel bonded to. Given the location where they lived, a dog was suggested. According to the audio from the nanny cam footage, the bonding process was a success, with the initial victim showing some self-confidence, even looking his mother directly in her eyes. The dog was well trained and didn't react to the extreme emotions exhibited in the lounge area. 3 weeks later, the mother could be seen running into the lounge. The time was quite late, judging by the lack of light outside the windows. Blood could be seen on her clothing. Judging by her wails and screams, the child was dead, mauled by some animal. Clutched tightly in her hand is the cordless phone for the house. While the phone line was disconnected, the microphone still worked, and the hard drive in the base was still recording. The mother was aware that the phone lines weren't working, and she could hear scraping movement upstairs. This was confirmed via the recordings acquired. She was then seen rushing to a window, and she looked out in shock. After significant alterations of the video recording, a lupine humanoid cryptid, known commonly as a dogman, was seen skulking at the edge of the camera range. Presumably seeing this, the mother backed away and turned as a canine head peered around the corner, nearly hitting its head on the doorframe, indicating that it was not of a standard height of any known dog breeds. It stalked into the room on its hind legs. The coloration looks like the emotional support animal previously mentioned. Parts of the fur seemed matted down, likely with blood. A third dogman also entered, but was on all fours. Judging by the gait, it seemed unsure of its pace. This could be attributed to the polished wooden floor. The secondary victim was frozen in fear when she saw the two cryptids. The attack was swift and coordinated. The one on all fours went low, while the standing one went high. Her death was quick. The third one joined the other two for the meal, after the standing one unlocked the door. They then walked to the door, opened it, then bounded off into the night. Police investigation came as part of an initial missing persons report after the mother hadn't called her family. Police found the bodies, and they opened a homicide investigation. The case remains open. The bodies were diverted from the regular coroners to ones affiliated with this forum. Autopsy. Initial victim. Multiple bite marks to the arm and stomach area. Scratch marks from a large paw evidenced on the limbs. Microtumors located within the brain which could indicate the autism and social anxiety problems. Secondary victim. Bite wound on the ankle, severing an Achilles tendon. Single bite mark to throat. Evidence that the stomach area was gorged. Missing organs include ovaries, kidneys, uterus, stomach, pancreas, liver, 95% of the intestines. Secondary investigation. Our primary one. Scouring the nanny cam footage shows the weeks leading up to the attack. Movement could be seen during the day of the emotional support animal. No anomalous movements detected. 5 days after the bonding, a dogman cryptid could be seen creeping up to the house. The emotional support animal stood up and walked over to the wall, opposite of where the dogman crawled to. The ESA stood there for several minutes until the dogman cryptid crept away. The initial victim just watched his ESA stand at the wall, while the initial victim is normally next to the ESA at all times, even during sleep. The movement at the edge of the nannycam view resumed until the night of the attack. Movement in the peripheral showed 2 dogmen approach the house. One skulked at the edge of the light on all fours, while the other ran to the side. Screams could be heard from a location suspected to be the child's bedroom. Soon, the mother could be seen entering the lounge in the state previously described. Several journals were taken as evidence in the initial investigation. Upon discovery of the contents within, they were switched with duplicates, with explicit mentions of dogs being removed. The mother made note of several minor incidents when her child would stand at the window and look into the forest. When she asked if he would like to go for a walk in there, he refused violently. As soon as she mentioned that they wouldn't walk there, the child immediately stopped and hugged his mother. Judging by the description in the following incidents, it appears to the same location the ESA would stand when the dogman approached. The mother advised, while she did some basic yard work, that she always felt trepidation when she looked to the forest area, like there was something watching her. She tried to muster the courage to go look for herself, but didn't want to risk leaving her child alone. The journals of the boys seemed nonsensical, but after multiple encounters with children on the spectrum, certain clues were common amongst all of them. These journals were able to get upgraded in their standards of language. The initial victim was aware of the cryptid presence. When he would see the dogman standing outside his window, he would scream for his mother, causing the cryptid to flee. This happened for about 2 years. One day, while he was walking around the backyard, within view of his mother, he felt the dogman approach. Its claw snagged his shorts and started to drag him away, but his mother, fortunately, spotted her child disappear from view. When she approached, the dogman ran, leaving the child behind. What people would find most chilling is that the day the ESA stood near the cryptid was referenced in the book of the initial victim. Doggy was wrong, looked like doggy, but not doggy. Ma not know doggy wrong. Doggy looks at me like the bad thing at times. It is surmised that the ESA was turned into a dogman through unknown means, as 3 dogmen were seen running from the house. The ESA dogman was able to use his paw to turn the lock by hooking the key in between his toes. The handle was easier to manage. Details on the cryptid. Dogman. Dogman is of a common cryptid type, the anthropomorphic animal. While it doesn't have full human features, it is able to walk on hind legs for extended periods of time and display near-human intelligence. Significantly weaker than the more supernatural Wendigo or Skinwalker, regularly available firearms are enough to kill a dogman. Reports indicate that upon death, dogmen revert to their more base canine form. If there are any more cryptids you would like to know about, feel free to let me know in the comments below. As previously mentioned, there have been requests for a case including the cryptid known colloquially as Bigfoot. This is an unusual cryptid, in which the incidents involving are often just sightings of something big in the woods. But there have been journals from long-term hikers and campers who have had prolonged encounters with these cryptids. There's also one autopsy for a Bigfoot. The mortician who conducted the autopsy was inconsolable for months afterwards. He has recently returned to work. He has also requested counseling until further notice. Case file. Bigfoot, civilian. Number 011. A weathered-looking journal was found on a picnic table in a large national park. For obvious reasons, the exact location will not be included. Park ranger retrieved the journal, and after trying to find out the identity of the owner, the subsequent report made it to us, where we retrieved the journal and spoke with the park ranger. The park ranger agreed to not mention anything about this journal. The camper who wrote this journal had gone on a rediscovery adventure. They show how they hadn't been connected to the outdoors for a period of 8 years and greatly missed the tranquility. Having gone on a sabbatical, they did the appropriate level of research for the area they were going to, and had gotten equipment to replace old gear. They did some training to keep fit for the long hikes, spoke with the park rangers, and left. The details were removed from the relevant database. The beginning of the journal is a descriptive journey, making mapping the beginning quite easy. 2 weeks in is the first indication that there was something preternatural afoot. The sense of being watched, and the occasional muffled snap of a branch being broken. This went on for around 6 days. The person did not indicate any trepidation regarding these events. A couple of days after the sense of being watched stopped, the camper detailed an encounter with 2 very gruff-looking men. They had an almost feral look in their eyes, and their presence was intensely unsettling. Their communication was rough, almost punctuated with growls. Their leering gaze made the camper very uncomfortable. As they took 1 step closer, they both stopped simultaneously. They looked around, like kids caught with their hand in the cookie jar. A gasp escaped their lips, and they bolted away. It wouldn't be until later that the camper would recognize the look and behavior. It was that of the startled prey. The writing is in cursive, and has been fluent throughout the journal so far. The night after that encounter, the camper noted that instead of feeling refreshed like they normally had since their excursion, they felt mentally exhausted. Careful examination noted that the cursive was not as flowing. For the next week, the fluency of the cursive writing was deteriorating, and block lettering was being used in place of it. Repeating mention of a reoccurring dream, the camper describes the ineffable urge to stand in the middle of a clearing next to a large silhouette of a humanoid. The dream would consist of the 2 of them standing there for hours on end. After the aforementioned week, the camper detailed the first popular encounter with a Bigfoot, or, to be more precise, the Bigfoot from the dream. Exiting their tents to cook an evening meal, the camper noticed their presence immediately. A large humanoid, approximately 9 feet tall, stood half hidden behind a tree at the edge of the small clearing. The camper was camping in. Instead of fear, the camper felt a sense of serenity. The camper nodded to the Bigfoot, then cooked their meal. The camper had trouble putting into words what happens next, because while he did engage in a form of communication, due to the nature of how the conversation took place, putting it into words seemed difficult, as 5 pages were filled with writing which was crossed out on multiple occasions. From what could be ascertained, the Bigfoot would telepathically impart the concept of something into the camper's mind. For this instance, it was the concept of cooking food. Not the description of it, but the concept. It seemed a little hazy, as if unsure. The camper tried to explain vocally about the process of cooking one's food, but the Bigfoot reinforced the idea, and instead of cooking, the focus was on the process of cooking. It took a while, but it seemed that the Bigfoot was looking for an invitation to join the camper for the evening meal. The camper tried to form the image of the two of them sitting together to eat, which the Bigfoot took as the invitation it was meant to be. For around 10 days, this guest would be invited to join for the evening meal, and they would sit and eat. The meal would have to be cooler for the Bigfoots to enjoy properly. The writing was getting thicker, as if the hand writing the information down was heavier than normal. Since the likelihood of the camper gaining such a significant amount of mass to allow this event to occur, the mystery would remain unsolved until the end of the journal. After the 10 days, the Bigfoot put forth the concept of community. The camper put forth the sense of city life, while shaking his head. The Bigfoot frowned, then sent the concept again, but this time the focus was on community in the forest with other Bigfoot. After a while, the camper agreed. The belongings were packed, and the pair walked off into the woods. It wouldn't be until they got to the location the Bigfoot was leading him to that the camper noticed that he was finally able to stand eye to eye with his large, quiet friend. 3 more journal entries followed, but the language was very broken English, like trying to describe thorough concepts in as few words as possible. The entry that the morticians found interesting was no the communal aspect of Bigfoot culture, but when the two saw those men, the concept of wrongness, imagined as a black fog with a large red cross in it surrounding those two, and then an image of an endless corridor of trees like a hellish maze. Small food items like berries were used as the concept for small amounts of food near the bald man's feet with an early sunrise. It was agreed that the Bigfoot, due to their telepathic nature, could cause people to become lost in their forest through telepathic manipulation, and while not violent, did leave enough food for the 2 bad men so they would not die due to starvation. Case file: Bigfoot autopsy number 01. The Bigfoot in question was found dead in a national park somewhere within the U.S. Since the park ranger wanted to be vocal about this discovery, he was gaslit into alcoholism, which, given his family background, took little effort. The Bigfoot was 9.5 feet tall, his mass weighing in at around 380 pounds. There was very little fat. The mortician who conducted the autopsy noted that their hair was soft to the touch, and the skin was tough to cut through. Preliminary examination showed significant injuries to the torso and the arms. Scratch marks indicated a skinwalker, due to the variety of necrotizing fasciitis in the wounds. What was startling was that there were antibodies for the infection, preventing any decomposition. The musculature was incredibly dense, as was the bone structure. The killing blow seemed to be when the claws of the skinwalker penetrated the heart. There were no adrenal glands within the Bigfoot, nor were there any reproductive organs. But judging by the above-mentioned journal, it seemed that these cryptids can infect others, but only the ones they choose. I would state that Bigfoots are a higher form of cryptid. While their communicative abilities are unique, they have shown to be capable of communicating with others, and their ability to show mercy, while they could have easily killed those men, indicates a higher level of communicative awareness. Mothman. Research in popular culture indicates that the winged cryptid is an omen, mainly connected with ill fortune. Correlations between alleged Mothman sightings and diseases seems to indicate this. There are not many cases involving the Mothman in these archives, mainly due to the fact that this deals with the dead people directly, caused by cryptids or other unexplained events. Since the Mothman does not kill, this greatly reduces the amount of information that is able to be accrued. There are some journals of Mothman events scribed by those who have seen the cryptid. Case file: Mothman, civilian, number 004. Journal of a 15-year-old girl. Most of the contents are that you would normally find inside a journal of a teenage girl who still kept up with this tradition. The entries of interest in regards to the Mothman are very few. The first entry describes a walk that the girl took through a wooded area near her school. She notes how she is confident walking through the woods by herself, due to her athleticism. She also had several years of wilderness experience. The walk was supposed to be about 3 hours. Approximately 40 minutes into this walk, the girl spotted a dead deer with circular holes in the chest area. She looked around for any sign of a hunter, but this trail was a known walking area, so the chance of a hunter risking the death of an innocent person would be extremely unlikely in her purview. She stood up and continued on her way, and she was bothered by a feeling she could not describe, like a light buzzing in her mind that kept her very vigilant. After 10 minutes, the girl was brought to a halt, when she saw a tall humanoid with wings, glaring at her with red eyes. The sight of this monster caused the girl to bolt. The girl would make notes, indicating she was paranoid about this creature. 2 months later, she would detail her second encounter. This one was the most terrifying, as her paranoia had dwindled down significantly, until it landed by her bedroom window. Its glowing red eyes would peer into her room, and seeing this tall monster gaze at her brought her paranoia back. She screamed at it to leave, and when her parents came to investigate, they could not see any signs of the monster she described. This is when things took an unusual turn. When the girl was able to control herself long enough to conduct her own investigation, she noticed some large gouges in the wall and on several trees. She took photos with her cell phone, and her writing became significantly more manic. She would claim to see it more and more. It began to have a deteriorating effect on her sanity. Her parents pulled her from school due to the repeated screams she would exhibit. Eventually, the girl would be placed in a mental institution. Her suicide occurred 5 years later. Secondary investigation. While some hallmarks of the encounter were similar to other encounters, the secondary investigation brought to light some intriguing details. First of all, there were no records of a deer carcass found with holes in it along any walking trail. The closest thing was a dead squirrel, which had a singular circular hole in its neck. This was quite decomposed when found, but nothing else found matched the injuries as described. Obviously, the false sightings while she was in public were noted down, but the photos were what drew the attention of the investigators. Out of the 5 working the case, only one of them could see the apparent damage. But going by what the investigator described and what was noted in the journal were almost as conflicting as they were corroborating. This investigator was known as a conspiracy theorist who was very fastidious in his investigations, while almost none of them bore fruit. The one leading to his current employment certainly did. This had led to speculation that the apparent correlation leading to the popular belief that Mothman is a harbinger of tragedy could be its ability to cause people to become obsessively paranoid and allow people to look for links that aren't actually there. The parallel theory, it is called. 2 lines, one denoting tragedies, and the other for Mothman sightings. Some dates would mix, but given the population density, the fact that technology is not infallible and human error is also a leading factor, it could be explained that it is 2 lines of events not overlaid, but happening to share the same details some of the time. I am unsure of what to make of this myself. While this sounds like it sort of debunks the Mothman, I think there is a little more to it than that. Imagine being able to turn some of the more observant enemies into a paranoid fool that wouldn't be believed because the paranoid person no longer fully functions on the same societal norm. Their actions would discredit them, and they would be the boy who called wolf. While they do actually see the wolf, no one else can. It makes no sense to me. I am not sure if it makes sense to you all, but this is one possible interpretation. The Mothman is an aerial scout unit, who is able to disguise itself in paranoid delusions. A scout for who or what is yet to be determined. The second interpretation is that it could be weeding out those vulnerable to the rake. As a cryptid, the rake is able to have a more psychologically draining effect on those who are unfortunate enough to encounter it, and the almost nihilistic viewpoints those people suffer could easily have been paranoid delusions instead. But this is just my interpretation of the cases I have seen and transcribed. Not everyone will agree with me, and that is perfectly fine. But I think there is a lot more to these cryptid entities and the unusual deaths that are not related to any logical chain of events. I'm just not sure what that is yet. The rake is a cryptid, feared for the emotional impact it has on its victims. From the cases I have read, the rake is related to the crawler and the fleshgate. All are pale humanoids whose primal method of locomotion is crawling. While the crawler and fleshgate seek flesh to consume, the rake does not appear to. Feeding off of the negative emotions it can force from others was the main theory of its diet. The various autopsy reports indicate otherwise. Case file. Rake, civilian. Number 08364. In the western United States, near 3 designated skinwalker territories and 7 suspected Bigfoot domains, a rake cryptid maneuvered its way into a small commune. It was a commune of 4 adults and 5 children. The point of this commune was the return to nature ideology. No cell phones, except for an emergency satellite phone. Due to this, most of the information is from the victims themselves, journals and scribbled notes. That and the words the satellite phone was able to record. The commune was self-sufficient. The runners, as the people in charge dubbed themselves as they were running the commune, were not the first people to notice the presence of the rake. Like a horror movie cliché, it was the youngest, a 4-year-old male. His journal had the word rake randomly dispersed in the writing for 2 weeks. The more alarming journal post was when the boy mentioned his scary friend, the rake, wanted to be let in. So, the boy let his scary friend in. This could have been dismissed as fake, but the eldest daughter wrote an evil thing was sitting on the end of her bed, watching her with hollow eyes. Every so often, it would breathe. After what felt like hours, it left, and one word appeared in her mind. Rake. This repeated for 4 days, but with each successful night, the rake would pour nihilistic thoughts into the eldest daughter. Depression was swift. Journal entries from the parents noted that their eldest daughter was withdrawn and would only mention one thing. The rake is here for us all. The youngest would exclaim that the rake was a friend, but when pressed into revealing his friend, the boy would mumble that it is shy. The eldest son, believing his younger sibling, decided to hunt for the rake. The uncle of the commune accompanied the eldest son. Their bodies wouldn't be recovered until the secondary investigation. Subsequent journal entries indicated that the voices of the 2 would-be hunters could be heard, but the youngest would block the door and say his scary friend was teasing the commune. When pressed for details, the youngest boy described his scary friend, and how he would make him and his eldest sister think thoughts of death. The rest of the commune tried to convince the boy except for the remaining sibling. She would show the sketches she had been drawing for months, sketches of a pale individual with very long black claws, voids for eyes, gazing directly at the viewer with an intensity that should be impossible. The last journal entries of the commune, except for the youngest, expressed private concerns as they all had those feelings of nihilism and of the inevitability of the rake. The youngest boy's last written words were, "I'm sorry." Autopsy 1. Eldest boy. Slashing marks to the calf muscles, cleaving the muscles in 2. Presence of adrenaline in the system indicates that he was in a state of fight or flight. Femoral artery was pierced cleanly. Death was slow due to smaller puncture wounds on the femoral artery. Autopsy 2. Uncle. Deep lacerations to the chest. Wounds to the arm indicate defensive wounds. Autopsy 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Mother, father, middle child, boy, youngest son, eldest daughter, aunt. All found dead, sitting at the dining table. Post-mortem evidence indicates the bodies were moved after death. Every person sitting at the table showed no outward signs of death. However, when the brain was examined, multiple scars were found throughout the brain. All the scars were arched, as if in repeated bite marks. Missing child, youngest daughter. Evidence strongly implicates the daughter as the one who moved the bodies of the family to the inside of the commune dining area. Her fingerprints matched 6 pictures placed in front of the appropriate victim on the table. Footsteps of the youngest led out of the commune and disappear alongside the tracks of the rake. Rake information. The rake is an entity that feeds on induced nihilistic thoughts. People who are naturally nihilistic are immune to the enhancing effects that the rake naturally emits. This is thought to be an extension of the crawler's fear aura. The rake is a humanoid creature that moves on all fours like an animal. Long claws are seen from the forelegs. However, the evidence indicates that the length is a gouge. While the rake does have claws, as evidenced by the hundreds of bodies it has attacked, the length is quite short, but the length is likely to allow the rake to deduce how much nihilism or basic fear that the would-be victim produces. Due to the inherent nature of the rake, firearms have an indeterminable effect, as people are either too scared or nihilistic to make the attempt. The rake, due to its feeding capabilities, will, when it finds a suitable host, torment the victim with night visits and the aforementioned aura of nihilism. There is a theory that the youngest daughter was taken not for food, but to make another rake. While this is wholly speculation, it is the best theory that is agreed upon by the majority of the morticians. As you can imagine, there were a lot of cases I had to sort through. After reading about that nihilism aura that the rake apparently projects, I must admit I do ponder what would happen if I ever encountered this cryptid, or its variations. Also, finding out if these things can be killed would be helpful knowledge. I do apologize for the lateness of this case, but there were interruptions that required greater attention than normal. Werewolves, or the more encompassing term, therianthropes. Unlike the deplorable representation in the crimes against literature referred to as the Twilight Saga, or as I refer to it, why I am glad I have no emotional connections to people. From the vocal interjections, Teen Wolf would be a far greater viewpoint. Apparently, therianthropes are more like guardians than monsters. Some therianthropes can have their minds twisted by their capabilities. Therianthropes refers to the ability to turn into an animal through unknown means. Werewolves are the most acknowledged example of this. But apparently, any strong enough connection to a spirit animal and training that differs from person to person. You can actually gain the ability to shapeshift. This shapeshift is to a hybrid form of human and animal. But very rare therianthropes can shift completely into the animal form, though these are more rare than an honest used car salesman. Before I continue, I will point out that the morticians that granted me permission have asked that I only archive certain cases involving therianthropes and any victims, but they would rather this be more educational than threatening. I was able to point out that an example of a therianthrope who went blood mad, as they termed it, would be useful. They were not happy, but after several hours of heated discussion, they relented, grudgingly, but only if I went into great detail about therianthropy and the differences to cryptids like skinwalkers. Like previously mentioned, therianthropy, or shifting, is different to the few other forms that other cryptids are able to replicate. The closest example is the skinwalker. However, due to the secrecy of Native American shamanistic rituals, we are unable to examine the ritual. And given the levels of stupidity and curiosity people can demonstrate, I wouldn't post the information anyway, even if I did possess it. For therianthropy, the training stages allows the shifter to adapt to things like skin of an animal, the muscles, and speed, but the most tricky aspect is the mentality. Physical changes can be eased into, to allow greater control, but the mental changes are the part where shifters can turn feral if the human mind doesn't gain dominance. One of these cases would be used as an example below. However, those who do not make the shift successfully, they elect to use their powers to hunt the more dangerous cryptids, and play guard duty for the bigger dangers. Though, while these Therians were effective in cryptid combat, they couldn't fight them all. The rake has an especially destabilizing effect on therianthropes. The skinwalker trigger a truly heightened fight-or-flight response. The fight would be to the death, typically the Therian. The common Therian forms are wolf, horse, boar, and bear. There are others, but I am asked to mention them only in the relevant case files. The case file I have chosen, and have to defend my choice for, is one involving the last true werewolf. I have been asked to omit any dates, as there are still hunters out there who are trawling sites like this looking for clues to the Therian threat. They are obsessed with killing Therians. Case file. Werewolf. Therian. Number 001. Final. Journals and maps indicate the location of where the last true werewolf was eventually killed. The language is not English, but something I was able to get translated. Again, the language is not something I am allowed to disclose. We have been hunting him for the past 6 weeks. His aggressive nature is causing his trail to be easy, but we are patient. We know he is the last. The Inquisition, the Shadow One, has killed many werewolves and eliminated most of the more insidious vampires. But this Lycan has proved to be a cunning predator, almost apex. He has avoided the small hamlets in the area. He must be hungry. This makes him even more dangerous. A predator that is hunted, hungry, and desperate. I do not expect any of us to live through this hunt, but his death is required. Therian 2 has informed us that we have found a lair. Tracks and recent kills indicate that it could be the Lycans. We spread out and attune our senses to sharpen. There are 5 other Therians, including myself. Therian 4 is a bear shifter. She is looking at the mouth of the lair with an odd expression. Human, the Therian whispered. All our eyes snap at each other. This changes things. A hostage, or a snack. Unless we move, the human is dead. As the hunt's leader, I walk into the clearing. I am a wolf shifter. There are 2 boar shifters, the bear shifter, and a horse shifter. The others follow me into the small clearing. The boars were twins. They nod at me. We know our roles. The boars were to play bait. The horse shifter was a trained healer. The bear shifter is the main powerhouse. As a wolf, I have inherent understanding of team leadership. I howl, reaching that primal aspect, issuing a challenge. The others scatter to their positions. I stand in front of the lair mouth. A growl that seems to shake the entire forest ripples from the lair. It stalked out with restrained strength. I charged at it, and I knew the response. It charged at me. The lichen leaped at me, but I slid along the ground as the boars charged in together. Their tusks barely broke its skin. From this point, the riding would change in style. The language was the same, but the riding is much shakier. It was apex. A lichen reached the pinnacle. We won't survive this fight. The bear charged in with a roar like a volcano. The blows seemed to shake the very air around us all. The leader started darting in and out, snapping at hamstrings and other weak points. The boars started to mirror their attacks, aiming for the same spots on the opposite side. The fight was the most brutal I'd ever seen. The lichen's claws easily ripped through our flesh. The bear was greatly wounded, and the hunt leader was missing his throat, still clutched in the lichen's right hand. The surviving boar was being held up in their left hand, and its kicks were getting weaker. I move and strike. My kicks are powerful. I reach out with a kick and slam into its throat. I can feel the wind box collapse beneath my hoof. He throws the boar away. A loud crack answers the question I dreaded. I start to dart aside, but with his last few breaths, he managed to slash against my stomach. Then, he collapsed. I took the book from the leader, and have documented the final fights. I am dying, but this needs to be recorded. I'm going to ask the human who is staring at us. Get him to hand this journal into a sage. We fought well. I remember reading somewhere that the rate that herd animals are killed by predators in Africa is the same rate as the number of people who just completely disappear. Some of these are fodder for the dark web and the like. But what about the people who don't just disappear, but are known to die through tragic happenstance? Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 and other similar events. The Titanic is another one, and the dreaded Bermuda Triangle. As I implied, I did spot some of the missing in the dark web, but what happens to the larger groups of people who died? Their bodies are most unrecoverable. There is a bit more to their death, judging by the records I have seen. Dragons are real, but since they cannot be controlled or weaponized by conventional means, placation seems to be the one-hand tactic for dealing with them. While there are not many in the world, as those details have been scrubbed from many specific mention, and given the complete radio silence from Russia and China, we would be unable to provide an exact number anyway. Every so often, a large group of people vanish tragically. Flight 370 is a fairly public and recent event, similar to what is described. 239 people, or as they have become viewed as portions of a meal. Every so often, a group of over 150 people would disappear, presumed to be dead. They are divvied up and prepared per the dragon's requirements. If the cooks are able to preserve some part of the body, it would be the only piece found for closure of the bereaved families. This has been going on for a while, decades at least. As time goes on, the number of people that need to disappear increases, or the frequency in which groups vanish. I am well aware of how this sounds, and then I thought about it, especially for modern times, specifically mobile phones. Ever wonder why you are asked to turn them off when you are on flights? They say it is so it doesn't mess with the instruments, but if I'm going to design an interconnected system to stay in control of an airborne vehicle that can be measured in the number of elephants, I would make sure that there is no way that the mobile home network, in absolutely no way, interferes with my systems. We have all seen the signal strength indicators on those devices. Why can't we just actively track mobile phones by signal strength? It obviously makes a connection with the tower or network, so it is plausible. All they would need, in theory, is to search for those missing phones along the network and use that to triangulate the location of a majority of them. Sure, water damage could affect it, but they still had a connection before the damage. All it would take is the records of these events to narrow it down. In any case, I know you are here for more than my observations. There is a journal of a dragon discoverer, and the autopsy of said discoverer as well. Case file. Dragon. Number 013. I have been traveling through the jungle for weeks now. I am reasonably certain that I am lost. However, I am not new to these expeditions and pay attention to the surroundings. I have also been here before, so I have that as an advantage. I heard a noise last night. Something is stalking me through this jungle. I'm going to set up my tent and write more once I have a clue of what is going on. Several days have passed, with rough distance traveled in the direction. I had never experienced silence like this. The only sound I can hear is the scratching of pen on paper. I can barely hear myself breathe. When writers describe a sense of dread blanketing the area being described, I now fully appreciate and hate it. I can't focus. I should be 2 days away from the cave system I am looking for, though, when I think about it, I really don't want to go. 2 more days with notes pass. It hasn't killed me, but I don't know how much longer I can keep it entertained. I know the source of dread now, and seeing it, I almost wish for the soul-crushing emotion. Dragons are real. I'm staring at one right now. Dark scales cover this glorious monster, at least 40 feet long. It just lies there, bones all about. When I entered the cave, I didn't even see it until it blocked the passage when I went to leave. When it speaks to me, it is excruciating, not in volume, just the raw power of its voice. He says I am its first visitor in a long while. It spoke to me for hours. I'm not sure. My bones are still aching. For all I know, it could be minutes, but the pain is excruciating. And I have been bitten by a bullet ant. Several sketches of the dragon are seen in the journal. I hear movements from the cave mouth. The dragon is awake and smiling. It is the most horrifying smile I have seen. A large metal cage filled with corpses gets pushed in. The journal ends there. Apparently, the Morticians are part of a larger shadow community. It is through another aspect of the community that the journal was passed on. Curiously, it was not destroyed. When I asked the Morticians why it wasn't destroyed, they reminded me that it is plausible to follow the man's path. There is an autopsy file of the explorer. Autopsy. Male. Late 30s. Bone structure is riddled with microfractures. Skeletal structure was compromised. Cause of death was a morphine overdose, administered while explorer was asleep. Apparently, dragons can cause microfractures to normal humans due to the intensity of their power. But the humans with the LRP5 mutation with gain of function are able to resist the damage. However, since the known LRP5 mutations are of interest to the scientific community, the LRP5 ones who are not tracked are encouraged to assist the shadow community. As a side note, an agent who wishes to speak with me has been knocking on my door for the past hour. I will speak with her momentarily. I will update you depending on how the conversation progresses. Apologies for the delayed update, but the conversation with the agent I previously mentioned has consequences that demanded an immediate response. While a certain government has been keeping abreast of my updates, they approached me solely due to my history. Specifically, Case 1. The base where I had last deployed to had been operating smoothly. Too smoothly for anything having to deal with the government or military bureaucracy. They asked, as gently as any secretive government agency concerned about the integrity of a military base on U.S. soil, for me to accompany them on a base visit. We left immediately. The ride to the base was tense, judging by the very slight shifting of the 3 agents I was accompanying. We got to a cheap motel an hour's drive from the base and booked in for the night. While I was handed a uniform to change into, I pondered over some of the cases I had read and not archived yet when an epiphany occurred. What if the morticians and whoever else pondered about the cryptids were wrong about the relationship between the rake, the fleshgate, and the crawler? What if they weren't offshoots, but aggressive scouts? I am unsure for whom they are scouting, but this is just an alternate perspective based on the facts. The rake and the fleshgate are reported to have some influence over the human mind. The rake is more psyops, and the fleshgate is more focused on infiltration tactics. The crawler would be a shock troop, focusing on the aspects of fear when people notice the true inhuman speeds they can actually exhibit. Taking this perspective into a real-world situation, the best way to know how to use your scouts effectively is to test them against people who are less observant, to see who the scouts and their targets will react to. Remember, we are not dealing with humans spying on humans, but monsters spying on humans. Who would believe you if you say that you saw a monster watching you? You would be teased or ignored. Only the people who have also witnessed these monsters would believe you, and as a group, you would be disregarded or mocked. So, looking at the premise of this being regarded as a joke, let's push forward and go for execution. How would these invaders do just that? They could go for a small civilian population. With the inherent capabilities they possess, they could, if they were methodical, take over very swiftly and easily. But all it would tell them is what they would already know. They can cause fear, paranoia, or despondency. But what about military personnel? Not the elite special forces, but the bread and butter of the armed forces. A small base of little consequence in the grand scheme of situations. A goods testing ground. A petri dish of sorts. Like the base I was deployed to for my promotion examinations. If this agency wanted to grab me, I doubt I could stop them if they rushed me. Them wanting a dialogue that then progressed to out their current situation could indicate that this totally insane theory had some basis. Looking over the uniform, I remember that event, and the decisions I made, and something struck me as unusual. There isn't supposed to be a Wendigo that close to the base. It ranged almost 80 miles farther away. Something is up. And I think this situation almost certainly ties in. An hour after I settled down into my room, the primary agent entered my room. The look on his face was an expression of concern. While I pressed for details, she mentioned that her team was acting strangely, like they were waiting for prompts in conversation. She asked to stay in the same room as she didn't trust the 3 agents in the other room. With my knowledge of the unit I was traveling with, I agreed. I volunteered to sleep on the couch. Naturally, I wasn't stupid to actually fall asleep. I came up with 3 agents, the one in charge and her 2 subordinates. We never met any additional staff. I had a plan and needed to work carefully. Since I was suspecting a mass infiltration of Fleshgate, I focused on the thoughts of returning to the base. And only those thoughts. The night was long, but all 5 of us packed into the SUV and drove the rest of the way to the base. As we were let in, I noticed the guards watched me intensely. Stepping out of the vehicle and walking around, we noticed that all of them were staring at me. Until it was noticed by us. The layout hadn't changed, and I was asked how I wished to proceed. The agent in charge decided to speak with the base commander. I sat in on the meeting. The base commander seemed to be in control, but there were small details that I kept noticing. Odd twitches, overlong glances, shifting uncomfortably. They were small, but I could see them. They offered a tour of the grounds, which was accepted by the agents, but I declined. When asked, I reminded them that I had already attended this base in the past, but would like to visit the spot of my old shame. An escort was offered, and I took the opportunity. During my time at the base, I had paid attention to natural caves or overhangs in the area, should I somehow not make it back in time during an overlong excursion. While I'm not sure how Wendigo and Fleshgates would interact, I had a flash of inspiration. My escort was a 4-man squad who were behaving well, except for the sidelong glances I would catch. As we got closer to the site of the incident, their pacing shifted slightly. They were getting ready to jump me. I tackled the soldier to the side, grabbing his combat knife while we ran. The other 3 opened fire. Fortunately, by the time they started firing and the time I tackled their 4th, was enough for me to get behind a tree. The knife went into the throat of the Fleshgate, stripping his weapons off of his body. I counterattacked and was able to eliminate the 3 remaining Fleshgates. Fleshgates bleed an off-pink color, and the consistency is thicker than blood. I removed from them their weaponry and some MREs, just in case. I looked around, trying to get my bearings, and I headed away from the base. It took me half an hour to find what I suspected. A dead Wendigo. I grabbed some poisonous mushrooms and took them closer to the base. I couldn't fight everyone there with standard weapons. They could scatter too easily. But we all needed to eat, and hopefully they are susceptible to poison. And as you can likely ascertain, they were. I will write up the details of the rest of the encounter and how the truth was kept hidden from the government, plus the various autopsies that would be conducted. I also met a retired mortician. Sorry for the delay. This has been a difficult case file to finish writing up, mainly due to the repercussions of my actions. Like I previously mentioned, I was suspicious regarding the personnel of the base, and given what I found in the forest, I took precautions. Knowing the poisonous herbs and mushrooms in the area, I took a significant amount. The base personnel amount is wrong. There are likely to be more discrepancies, and I knew that one of those agents is likely to be another Fleshgate. I have the tools to do what is required, but deployment will be difficult. I needed to affect as many people as I can, including the agents. I am the only person I know is not affected. I got little sleep, and not that any reasonable individual would in this situation. Knowing some protocols, I was able to use the natural poisonous substances to infect the food and cooking utensils. Hours later, the infiltrators started to succumb to the poison. I figured that it would be likely that I would be identified as the culprit. Fortunately, when I was based here, I would plot how I would assault this base. Positions to use for choke points, places to hide myself or supplies. While the army personnel do not carry normally, the agents would be required to arm themselves. The agent who brought me here figured me out. I acted, slamming her against the wall with my hand over her mouth, and fought her for her weapons. 2 discharges went wild during the struggle, and I was able to gather control. 1 to the guy, 1 to the head. Blood poured from the wounds. I grabbed her spare clip and her cell phone. Tossing the cell phone to the side once I left the building, I went on the assault. It took me 2 hours to kill everyone. I received a total of 5 gunshots. Ignoring the pain, I noticed that not all bodies bled red. About 65% of the bodies seemed to slightly deflate upon death, and the liquid that leaked was not red, but a light pink color. It also didn't look like blood. The consistency was slightly thicker, almost like mustard. While I was searching the commander's office, who was a Fleshgate, I created a throwaway email account and emailed a mortician contact. I sent them the direct dial number for the office only. 8 seconds later, the phone rang. I told them about the Fleshgate infiltration into this base. I explained my actions to them, and they advised they would send a retired mortician to attend the site. While they never dealt with autopsies anymore, they stayed within the organization. I waited. Part of me wanted to move the bodies to make corpse retrieval easier, but the practical side of me said that they would likely be upset with me disturbing the evidence. Sitting in the commander's office, the wait was long. I wanted to focus on how to identify Fleshgates, but it would require resources I do not have access to, and I also had no major inclination to look too deeply into it. I appreciated my archivist duties. While being active would be appreciated, I would rather just archive. The retired mortician arrived in a large truck. 3 people piled out in the back. I met them at the gate. As they approached on foot, I pulled out a knife. I explained that some of the corpses were Fleshgates and bled a different color. I cut myself slightly and bled. The others complied with the request and showed the same color. I was mentally projecting an off-green color, but it seems these were humans. I walked the morticians through the assault on the base, and I explained about the cryptid corpse in the woods. The retired mortician thanked me for the detail when I spotted his name tag. I confirmed that this was the mortician that retired after a mush corpse. His face paled significantly at the mere mention of the incident. He politely advised that I do not mention that ever again. Pointedly would be a more apt way to describe it. The bodies were placed into the trunk, and we all piled in. The ride back was quiet. The one thing I did not share was the haunted look. Everyone here had a personal encounter with a cryptid. It took me a while to recover sufficiently from my injuries. While that transpired, the autopsies were conducted. Instead of doing a breakdown of each individual one, I will convey the pertinent details. Humans. Poisoned from the death cab mushrooms. Ingested. Likely cause of death. The ones who survived the initial poison were shot multiple times with a bullet to the head post-mortem. This actually caused some trouble for the attending morticians, as there seems to be discrepancies in the parts of the brain governing memory and perception. The damage makes it hard to verify if all suffered the same level of inflammation, triggering what could be attributed to the false memories. Fleshgates. Humanoid with a similar skeletal structure made of hardened cartilage in an approximate falsimal of the human skeleton. Upon death, the cartilage softens, given the slightly deflated appearance as noted by the asset who eliminated the nest of infiltrators. The musculature also seems to have a more fluid quality, allowing the Fleshgates to alter their forms to better reflect upon the false memories they impart. The brain has extra sections which are theorized to affect others, allowing false memories to allow for easier infiltration. Extra glands are filled with a pheromone which allow for weakening of the immune system, allowing the telepathic manipulations to occur more easily within victims. Wendigo. Cryptid. Elongated humanoid. Deterioration of the vocal cords and the speech part of the brain indicates that the natural vocabulary is greatly diminished. The state of this part of the brain is equivalent to that of a baby learning to speak. Copying sounds heard with no understanding of context. The skin was thickened to deal with the lower temperatures they are readily exposed to, which also helps act as a natural form of body armor. The musculature is approximately 8 times greater than a human's, which also helps with body toughness. Claws are hardened nails to levels thought impossible. The Wendigo was beaten to death, which, given the resilience this particular specimen demonstrated, speaks greatly of the effectiveness of flesh gates. This is the 3rd infiltration attempt in the past 60 years. There were 4 experiments regarding the Ouija board from what I have seen. 3 of these cases showed no significant supernatural events, other than flickering of an entity. The 4th and final one demanded a cessation of these trials, once they recovered all the parts they could find.
Experiments. Ouija. Number 04. Final.
3 couples had been manipulated into performing on a Ouija board inside an abandoned home that had been fitted with surveillance cameras and microphones. 2 of these couples were not strong believers in the supernatural, not completely close-minded, however. The primary couple were religious, but not aggressively so. They brought a Ouija board from their home and chatted casually while setting up the board and planchette. The secondary and tertiary couples were not thrilled when they saw the board itself, but complied with the urging to partake. Customary opening rituals were performed, with what is believed to be a prayer. The audio did not reflect this. All that could be heard was screaming and begging for mercy for several minutes, while the 3 couples just sat there, praying. As they finished, the screaming stopped, and they asked the opening question. The only camera that didn't immediately turn to static was the one in the living area, where the Ouija board was set up. When I reviewed the tapes for archiving, I determined it to be smoke, not static. Not sure how we got different observations regarding this. As the question stated properly, there would be movements in the static/smoke. Humanoid at times, and not at other times. The noises made from these locations resembled growling. Not bestial, more primal. The only properly functioning camera revealed a 7th entity within that room. A tall humanoid with black skin and warped legs. It wasn't looking at the couples, but directly into the camera. The primary couple were a bit more energetic than the other 2 couples, for indiscernible reasons. The microphone in that area wasn't transmitting the conversation, even though it was working up until the completion of the opening question. The notes from the researcher spearheading this indicated that he could hear the couples talking just fine. They were trying to contact the spirit of a deceased grandmother of the male of the tertiary couple. Names would be given, but the remains were not identified, just matched to what was left. 3 minutes of questions later, the primary male glanced at a mirror and noticed the humanoid staring at them via the reflection. He went to yell, but was unable to make a sound. The others glanced at him oddly. Then a voice came from the primary male. Impossibly deep, the voice demanded they resume the experiment. This was underlined in the notes as well. When someone would attempt to question, the humanoid would raise a hand and scratch the air, but wounds would appear on the interjector. The voice would demand they resume. The face of the entity would flinch, like something not used to a facial structure would try to emulate a smile they saw someone else do from a great distance. The question became intensely personal, and going by the investigation conducted by the organization, the answers given were false. The questions were for those of a perverted sense of morality. The answers would be dragged out by the planchette, while the other 5 would vainly attempt to remove themselves. The entity's body started to flinch in what would be approximated as laughter. The notes from the experiment stop abruptly during an observation that some aberration was making their way down the hall. It is here, and it is happy. Those are the last lines from the case file. The footage goes black. There would be a 2-day pause. Then the head researcher, who was personally overseeing the experiment, would be located in a remote Danish bed and breakfast, and parts of the 6 volunteers would be discovered in the bed. When the matter was brought to the attention of local police, the organization was able to take control over the case and subsequent investigations. The room was covered in uncoagulated blood and fecal matter. Phrases in a language thought to be Latin were seen, but the translation team were unable to translate. They tried the rest of the global human lexicon with no success. The translation team would complain of seeing a writhing humanoid form haunting them 3 days before they commit impossible suicides. One was found hanging by a spider web. One had shot themselves in the head with no gun, residue, or casing. Just a hole that matched a .38 caliber bullet, with no indication of significant velocity. Just trace amounts of unignited gunpowder. The other swallowed medicinal pills, not available for commercial release for another 3 years, as the chemical formula was still being worked on. 3 left feet, 5 right feet, 2 right hands, 4 left hands, all missing fingers. 4 1/3 of a torso, 3.5 pairs of legs, 6 sets of teeth, 4 skulls, all dismembered pre-mortem. The aforementioned body parts were found in the same bed as the head researcher who woke up to the sight and screamed. The DNA was able to match up what was found to the missing couples. Semen was found on various pieces that matched the head researcher. The head researcher states that after everything went black on the screens, the entity abducted him and forced him to endure torture for a period of time that he has no words to describe, other than hellish. He stated he could see the couples were suffering lesser forms of torture, but the entities inflicting the pain and agony highlighted that the head researcher was to blame, as he wanted to see if demons and hell were real. Autopsies of the parts recovered show multiple fractures on the skeletal structure and tearing of muscles. Torsos had the traditional Y cuts of an autopsy. However, the scarring indicates that the wounds healed multiple times. The head researcher refused to fall asleep, saying he sees them when he closes his eyes. Whether he is referring to the demons or the people whose torture he caused, he will refuse to clarify. The head researcher also shows the same autopsy scarring. No further research is planned regarding the Ouija board, and I have asked the morticians that if they hear anyone moronic enough to try another experiment, to notify me immediately, so I can kill them. I am sorry for the delays in posting these case files, but it turns out, since my efforts regarding the infiltrated military base, I will be doing some field work with the retired mortician. We are to head to Scandinavia in the next couple of days. The mortician and I have returned from our excursion to Scandinavia. It was enlightening. We flew to Oslo first. The airport was busy, as you could imagine, but the mortician and I were fairly silent during the flight, except answering the questions asked by the air hosts. Our luggage for this leg was fairly light, only a few days of clothing and toiletries. The mortician didn't understand why I didn't want us to take cold weather and hiking gear from the US. I pointed out the climatic and geographical differences for the areas we would be hiking through compared to the majority of the United States. In Norway and other regions of the Scandinavian area, the gear would be better suited for their climates and terrain. So, buying it from there would be a wiser choice. We dropped our luggage off at the hotel and went shopping. We got boots, jackets, a couple of tents, and other hiking utensils. We also got a couple of larger suitcases to help us cart our new gear as we got closer to our next phase of this journey. One long bus trip to a place name we mangled in our pronunciation later. We had been in Norway for a couple of days. During the bus journey, there was an odd sensation. Like I'm walking through a garden and the owners are very keen on my presence. It is a very weighty sensation. We headed to our new hotel for a couple of days, and we looked into the local legends of the small town we are in. Nothing overly promising, but I did voice the experience I had on the journey. We asked around, and got the look at the funny American tourists reaction from most of the people in the town. But the mortician and I had instructions to follow. The task of trying to locate any trolls in the Scandinavian area. Given my military background and the funds the mortician was working with, we would be able to navigate the wilderness fairly well. The local populace mentioned some of the more dangerous plants in the area. We packed up and headed off, making sure to tell the local police station that we were planning on a week-long hike. Not much happened on the first day, and it was the second day when we both felt the judgmental gaze upon us. Mid-morning on the third day, we found a large rock covered with moss. I remember the initial research I did on these cryptids, and their believed behavioral patterns. There was what looked to be a part of a wall behind the rocks. Scandinavian trolls were believed to have thrown rocks at churches. I looked around and saw that the hillside area seemed a little odd. I approached carefully. The mortician watched warily.
"Hello, man."
A voice grated. Have you ever bitten a metal fork and you get that awkward sensation of metal on teeth? That's what the voice sounded like, but for the entire skeleton. The mortician approached.
"Truth Seeker,
The voice stated.
why are you two here?"
I could see a set of eyes staring out from the hillside, watching us with a timeless gaze. There was an actual troll. It appears to be sitting down, so I cannot give an accurate observation regarding its size. But from its huddled position, it was at least 4 stories high. We seek to know more about you, the mortician called out. The troll focused his gaze and spoke.
"How many pulp men?"
I know of 3, I answered. The mortician gripped my shoulder with surprising tightness and adds, 12 more, that we know of.
"And those out of time?"
The troll was more insistent on this question. I started to answer, stating that I was unsure of what he meant, when the mortician spoke up. 20. 8 were pulp men. The troll nodded and closed his eyes.
"We resume slumber. Our watch will start soon."
He grated. Day was slipping away, and we would need to camp soon. We set up our camp, and I waited for the mortician to speak. Very rarely one of the corpses we get is for someone not in our time period. Never from the future, always from the past. Sometimes these are also pulp men, as the troll calls them. he explains formally. I shake my head at the thought of the pulp men. Not cryptids in the traditional sense, just people who died repeatedly under so many causes of death, it was literally impossible to determine the cause. The accumulated injuries turned the skeleton, muscle, and organs into pulp. Autopsies are messy affairs. We ate some MREs and extinguished our very small fire. We turned in for the night. Some of it, anyway. Crashing was the only warning we got. Something very big was charging through. Elephant or rhino size. I clambered out of my tent and saw a very tall humanoid running right at me.
Hollow Man.
It declared. The mortician was making his way out of his tent when I ran. Grab your stuff and leave Norway, I shouted as I ran past. The thundering of the being behind me was like the bass of a vehicle cranking to obscene levels. I didn't run out of fear, per se. I just knew that this thing wanted to kill and or eat me. Running lengthened my life expectancy in strides. Running through a Norwegian forest, being chased by something that would dwarf an elephant, knowing it wants to eat you just for existing, is an experience I never wish to repeat. The only slightly saving grace for me, as the odd hour's light seems to have in this part of the northern hemisphere. I could barely make out the roots, thick bushes, and fallen branches. I used prey tactics to survive. I took sharp turns up to 90 degrees. I ran close or through very thick parts of the forest. This forced the thing to slow down, a little bit. I made it to a large open area after emerging from the forest. I ran a bit ahead and turned to face this thing. "Why do you seek to kill me?" I yelled. The thing slowed to a stop. It was a tall, bulky-looking human with bulbous facial features, except for the eyes, which were set in quite deep into its face.
Hollow Man will end the world with broken time. Eat Hollow Man. The world will live.
It growled. Would all trolls know this? I asked.
Hollow Man should stop talking.
I spoke with a troll yesterday. He didn't know me. I might not be the Hollow Man that will break time. I write about strange things in the world.
Gods and followers?
It asked, stuttering slightly. No. Dogmen, skinwalkers, wendigo, pulpmen, demons. The things that live in this world that the world try to ignore or hide from. Time is not my concern. Strange creatures are, I stated.
Dogmen, not natural. Troll talk,
It said, turning back the way we came.
I talk, troll. Hollow Man can leave. But if I see you again, I eat you.
It says, as it straightens itself up and walks the way we ran from. I watch it walk away before walking away myself. As I did, I pondered what I knew about these cryptids, trolls and ogres. I am of the view that the being that chased me was a Norwegian troll, known for consuming the flesh of those of the Christian faith. I consider these to be ogres. Powerful creatures, but not overly bright. They grow or consume enough to grow into trolls. Trolls have a greater purpose in the view of our world. I just have no idea what it could be. While there are some known cryptids in the water, either in the depths of the ocean or the relative shallows of inland lakes and rivers, they are more likely to submerge, rather than cause acts of violence that would bring the attention of the morticians to their activities. But there is a cryptid that is closely tied to the waters. There have been sightings of these creatures, though not as many as the large case files I have to document. Referred to as the Montauk Monster, and reported as a hairless sloth. It turns out that there is more to these creatures that the mainstream media do not wish to report. While I may find it unusual, those with an emotional rage greater than Edward Cullen in those movies may find it very disconcerting.
Case file. Cryptid. Aquatic. Montauk, number 0386.
The location of this body is near the city of Seattle, Washington, in the United States. The body was recovered at 0310 on April 10th, 1970. The body was washed ashore and spotted by a passerby. The desk sergeant who got the call was an informant for the morticians, who, after hearing about another Montauk, notified them immediately. The body was examined and the results were noted down. Autopsy. The cause of death was suffocation. The biology, as noted in the other Montauk autopsies, notes that the creature was adept to aquatic life, as evidenced by the gills on the side of the neck and beneath the armpits. The skin is soft, and the evidence of scale molting is detectable around the hands and feet. The brain is shown to have regressed from the original human body. The skeletal structure is a misnomer, as the skeleton is more elongated cartilage, and the musculature of the spine has been redesigned to allow a hands-free swimming form of locomotion. Speculation on the Montauks. As this is all theoretical and conjecture, there has been no case of a living Montauk being captured to prove or deny these theories. It is believed that very rare individuals who have been involved in a crash involving vehicles and deep waters, that they go to an emergency evolution/de-evolution. These highly unique individuals are theoretical, as the DNA of the Montauks and regular humans is different in some key areas. However, DNA tracing shows similarities to certain bloodlines around the world. However, the rest is mixed with fish DNA, which takes into account the gills and scales. Why Montauks beach themselves like whales is a mystery, though it is believed that a dormant part of the mind that has access to memories of being on land, they try to replicate that and suffocate. Though the groupings of these creatures have been brought to repeat action. Panama, Japan, Australia, theoretically, and the coastlines of the US seem to be the major points of these creatures, but the reasons are not readily apparent. Given the history of these creatures, it is unlikely they are in any way related to the military Dogman experiments. The forced combination of fish and human DNA would not be readily viable. Dolphin would theoretically be better, but we are not here to correct the scientific experiments of those with no moral compass, just to document the strange creatures of this world, and any corpses that either make or leave behind. As I read over the case files of these Montauk creatures, I am surprised at the lack of theory regarding the mythical city of Atlantis as a viable possibility, but there might be something in these case files regarding this. The retired mortician has popped in to see me a few times since we made it back from our encounter with the troll and ogre. He has never autopsied a Montauk, observing that if he had, then maybe the mush corpse wouldn't have affected him so badly. His skin pales again at the thought of his last autopsy he performed, but he doesn't vomit, which is progress. I'm curious about these Montauk creatures. If the theory is true that there are truly rare humans who can do a rapid form of evolution, I ponder whether it is a step forwards or backwards for evolution in human beings. The former mortician has asked if I would be willing to accompany him on further excursions, or even actual cryptid hunts, for the more dangerous ones out there. I stated in explicit terms that I would not hunt a skinwalker without significant firepower or greater knowledge of them. That was when the mortician showed me files I had pushed aside in favor of more intriguing cryptids. He noted that all other cryptids seemed to abandon areas where mush corpses were recovered for months. As I have repeated these mush corpses in the past, I will give a very brief overview. Mush corpses are humans who have, thanks to modern technology and the ability to record audio, have apparently been subjected to hundreds of deaths in a perverse Groundhog Day loop. And then after whatever causes them to suffer deaths that are literally impossible, the body would be found in a public area to be recovered. However, the overwhelming trauma has reduced everything that is not the skin into mush. This isn't visually detectable. Other tactile inspections reveal the horrifying discovery. It is of little wonder why these discoveries force morticians to quit, and apparently swear off soft foods altogether. Even the ambulance drivers who have to transport the body quit immediately after delivering of the body. At first it was assumed that the deaths were caused by some unknown organism. However, due to the aforementioned commercial flooding of portable recording technology, you can listen to every single death the victim has endured. They seem to be unaware of their fates unless they can see the cause. The one thing that really makes these bodies so upsetting is that the skin is completely unharmed. Apparently, cleaning up after yet another attempted autopsy on these bodies is almost as bad as the autopsy attempt itself. While I was pursuing the case files in regards to coastline accounts to get more information on the water-based cryptids, I found an unsettling account that, while not at all related, makes me, of all people, feel uncomfortable. This town was not based on the coastline, but it was within 50 miles. The original population was 263 before the event. The name has been scrubbed thoroughly from any historical records that I have access to, which, given the Mortician Network and their affiliates' networks, I can't find it anywhere. While the Morticians mainly deal with corpses of or made by cryptids, this was an isolated incident, until I found 6 other towns who also suffered the same disconcerting fates. No known pattern, country, or any motive could be discerned.
Case file. Incident Candyland. Town 01.
In the year 1873, there was a town whose name is no longer recorded, who went silent. The neighboring communities investigated this unusual activity and at first found nobody walking around the town. A deputy who had made the trip decided to investigate further. He entered a small saloon. He submitted his investigation in the report below. I came to... After Mr. Sampson reported that the farmers hadn't set their shipment of oats. The sheriff sent me to investigate. Traveling wasn't too bad, as it was a place I had been to from time to time. But as I drew closer, my stomach started to churn uncomfortably. Pressing on, as I trotted into the main town hall area, I felt something very bad had happened. I had seen no children, no farmers, nobody. It was a ghost town. A ghost town won't haunt me like what I saw in the saloon. Entering the saloon, I saw 3 people sitting around a table in the middle of a game of cards, and the barkeep was behind the bar. But the first thing that tipped me off was the air smelled sickly sweet. None of them were moving. I walked towards the card players, but they never reacted to me. I called out to them, but they were like dummies. The sweet smell got stronger. I grabbed the shoulder of one of the men, and it felt wrong. The arm didn't feel right. I backed off and swore.
I looked closer, and the skin looked wrong. My guts were telling me to run, but I didn't want to think what the sheriff would call me. I headed to the barkeep, and he just stood there. He never moved. That smell came again. Not as strong as the others, but it was still there. When I looked at the barkeep, I saw something very wrong. His eyes were gone. No blood. It looked like hard candy. I ran. I forgot my horse until I made it to the sheriff's office back home. The sheriff and the doctor arrived to investigate, and they found that all 263 inhabitants had undergone the same effect. The sheriff left the doctor to work. He autopsied all of the people. Given the near identical results, only differing in volume due to body size, the components of what the bodies were turned into will be listed below. The skin is tougher, similar to leather. There had been no damage to the skin, other than the fact that it had been treated to make it tougher. The fatty tissue underneath is cooking fat that was cold and slightly solid. Muscle tissue has become candy floss. Cartilage is replaced with taffy, and the bones are dried sugar, compacted into the skeletal form. The lungs also appeared to be a form of taffy as well. The organs below, where the diaphragm would be, is a meaty stew. The brain is caramelized popcorn. Over 250 people, all ages affected, and nobody can figure out why. The doctor, after conducting the autopsies, quit, and, according to reports, left town whenever a traveling carnival arrived. Apart from the fact that the bodies were still recognizably human, given the transformed composition, there were no ambient sounds other than the wind. There were no flies, crickets, bees, wasps, or any other loud insect. No birds sang, no dogs or cats. Just silence. The animals that were on the farms were missing. This was deeply unsettling to read, but while this village was in the United States, there have been 3 small townships in the Europe area, one in Great Britain, one in Germany, and the other in Romania. Russia even admitted that it happened to one of their townships, but that is all they will officially say regarding this event. The 6th was actually in China, but again, the reports are as detailed as an opposition ballot to Vladimir Putin. While there are other traveling carnivals or circuses who have unusual effects, this one, as far as I have read, is the most disturbing. Having tracked the majority of the carnivals at the time via very old newspaper clippings and journal entries that could be retrieved, it is literally impossible for this carnival to exist. Except, it has struck 6 times that we know of, and this is all we know. The last report was a little over 40 years ago, and as much as the technology boom has dampened people's interest in going to the circus or a carnival, but some older traditions are showing a resurgence. God forbid this happens again, especially to a larger population center. The morticians seem to find this event reoccurring unlikely, and I do suspect they may be right. I just wish I had more time to read over the military experiment files regarding the dogmen. That might make for easier reading, and there are so many other files for me to comb through. Maybe I'll read about a ghoul or something. Something to ease my mind would be highly appreciated. Fortunately, for the person who named this incident, they were already dead. If they weren't, they would be very shortly.
In truth, while I've heard of the Jersey Devil as an urban legend, I never figured it to be much more than a flicker out of the corner of someone's eye, or a branch snapping in the woods. While I was always aware that this job would show me things I would not be ready to comprehend, I always thought that the presence of trolls and ogres would be most extreme. Then I started looking into the Jersey Devil. For those who have either started reading these case files now or have asked for this particular cryptid to be archived, I will go over a brief rundown of this particular cryptid. The Jersey Devil is typically noted to be seen around southern New Jersey, hence the name. It is a small creature about 3 or 4 feet tall, goat-shaped head, hooves, and small forearms and leathery wings. One of the most reported features is its inhuman shrieking noise. It is also reported to be very fast. While there have been no confirmed deaths caused by this cryptid, observations by agents of the Morticians noted that the area that is said to be the domain of this cryptid is given a very wide berth by other cryptids. I do not blame them. I would rather get into a fight with an ogre than encounter this thing again. There were reports of animal corpses that suffered wounds not usually associated with any fatal injuries. Since there was no verified witnesses of this attack, it was assumed to be inflicted by a naturally occurring creature. Having seen monsters that could and would kill me should they choose to, this seemed a harmless investigation to go through. I packed for a night hike, as I wasn't planning on staying in its territory too long. The drive to the area was long. On arrival, I checked in at my motel and started on my hike. I had several days' worth of food and had some research on local non-poisonous and non-toxic flora in the area. It was careful work getting to the beaten track, and I found a meager area to set up as a camp. As I set my pack down, I felt a presence. It was enormous, like an extra weight trying to smother me. Whatever is capable of exuding this level of intensity was not a weak creature. Spinning around, I saw it, standing in the open and grinning at me. 3.5 feet tall, light brown fur. It held its belly and laughed. Well, that was the sensation it seems to be emulating, but the sheer volume was like Barry White chuckling like Santa Claus, and it had a level of menace that not even the ogre exhibited. It raced past me and was gone by the time I turned around. I stood there, shaking. It wasn't adrenaline, exactly. It was fear. It is very rare for sociopaths to actually experience a strong enough emotion to generate an honest response. Fear was a common aspect when one did a combat tour, but that was muted. But compared to the sheer dread I felt when this cryptid laughed at me, it was like comparing the alcohol content of a light beer and absinthe. Soon, the fear subdued, and I felt the obligation to stay out for one night. It was fast, and it had a laugh that I will always dread hearing again. But there wasn't much else I knew about it. I set up my tent, prepped a campfire, and waited for a while. As I watched, it appeared in my little camp area, its menacing grin still on its face. Then I felt the pressure. I have rarely had the displeasure of enduring a migraine, but this pressure within my skull was brutal. It just stared into me. Its focus was on my mind, and I could actually feel images form in my mind. It was disjointed, like a cutscene in a horror video game trying to be scary. Flashes of images, strobe-like effects of the images, and screaming. It took me quite a while, but I realized it was telling me something about what it actually is. The first image was to think of a bar log, except double its height, remove the fire from it, and the wings are made of demon flesh, perpetually dripping blood. The arms look spikier. At seemingly random points along its arms are shards of bone that jut out. Its smile in this form is the most predatory, bloodlustful smile possible across the known cryptids. Then I saw a Bible, and the image shatters into dozens of pieces. Then in each shard, the Bible is positioned to be in the center of each one by reflection. The two images flickered back and forth, but I thought I got the meaning. Because of the fragmented religious form on that holy book, the Jersey Devil cannot assume its proper form. The thing nodded. The migraine eased up considerably. Then more images appeared. This time it is of the Jersey Devil as it is described by others, but its shadow is that of its proper form. It walked through a firefight, bullets not affecting it. Rockets, machine guns, tank shells, throwing daggers, swords, axes, nothing affected it. As I considered a church, it laughed again, and I saw it standing behind a pulpit, apparently giving a sermon. It would grab the bowl of holy water and splash itself in the face while smiling. When I thought of the word angel, the shattered Bible image appeared, and I immediately got the meaning. Fragmented religion, diminished beings of power. The migraine was almost gone, but it felt like there was a blur wedged into my skull. The mini-devil walked off and returned, dragging a large buck behind it with an almost contemptuous ease. It dropped it at my feet and pointed at it and me, twice. This was easy to figure out, so I started to prepare some meat. By the time I had finished, it returned, dragging a dead Wendigo. It was one of the most tense meals I've ever been in. I cooked my venison. It ate the Wendigo meat raw and stared at me the entire time. I glanced at the face of its meal, and I am certain it looked horrified right before it died. After I had my fill, it pointed at me and then the direction of the motel. I started to pack up, and it growled. You know how people with the bass in their cars can make long hair go nuts, or make people throw up due to the intensity of the vibration? This was like the exact opposite of that. It was like my bones tried to push my muscles away with spikes for a second. I started to leave and glanced back. I saw its last image. At first, it was someone cooking meats over a fire, but instead of me cooking the venison, it was cooking me. I ran out of the woods and sat in my room for the additional 2 nights. The only thing of observable note is that other devil hunters heard a yipping in the woods. I heard that laughter. One of the few people who I actually got along with died a mysterious death. The death occurred about 7 years ago, and the one thing that seemed out of the ordinary was that her movements around any form or drainage with her house that I was able to observe seemed like there was a very slight outside influence. It would be like there was an invisible bubble that brushed her hands to the side. As unusual as it was, it never really stood out to me, until I read her death report. As it turned out, she was the 37th victim of a series of deaths caused by an unknown being. Case file. Drained. Civilian. Number 035. Deceased woman, identified as Jennifer Mills, was found inside her apartment. Due to lack of attendance at her job as a sales representative for a large hardware company. 4 days without communication and calls from family and work colleagues, the police gained entry with access granted by the building supervisor. The skin was found on the bathroom floor. The supervisor was horrified by the remains of her body. During the investigation, a small journal was found, documenting the last 5 weeks of her life, which was the same time as when she moved in. References to a therapist allowed the police to find out more about the deceased. Interviews with the therapist indicate that the victim was a victim of a subset of trypophobia. Instead of irregular holes, it was drainage pipes, specifically regarding house plumbing. She could feel something was trying to reach her through the plumbing. She would have nightmares about the pipes acting like a snake, slithering across her bedroom floor, but when she woke up, nothing would be different. After 8 months of conversation regarding this, in which she is adamant that she sees a singular eye looking up at her through the drainage cover. Oddly, the shower wasn't a problem for her. The doctor recommended that the deceased use a journal to document her feelings, and they would go over it at their weekly sessions together. One thing that was noted was that the fear was only when the deceased was conscious of her proximity to a drain in her home. Since this was a problem that had occurred at her old residence, a move was suggested, in case it was an odd sensation of domicile dissonance. After the move, the sensation seemed to escalate in intensity. For reasons currently unknown, the deceased was not afraid of approaching these drainage areas and would be functional until they see the drain. Then the fear kicks in. It is highly unusual among phobia sufferers. The doctor paled at hearing the description of the state of her body. She mentioned she knew of one other therapist who had a near-identical patient in terms of specific phobia subset and state of body after recovery by police. Details were exchanged, and the police resumed their investigation. The initial paperwork triggered automated spy bots within various networks caught the expression hollowed out. The morticians took custody over the investigation. The morticians were able to uncover details that they didn't want the police to disseminate. Every case so far, the skin of the person was found within arm's reach of a drain, normally near the bathroom sink. A singular circular wound, similar to the holes in the drain on a finger, is the only visible indicator of what has happened. No signs of skeletal, nerves, pulmonary, or circulatory systems could be located. Fatty tissue is also missing as well as the musculature. The obvious action is to check the plumbing. The drain cover is there, but there are no pipes at all. Kitchen, laundry, toilets, and bathroom. All of the plumbing would be gone. Upon further inquiry, the owner of the building or water board company would note that the water for the location has been turned off, and that there is no account that was open for the name of the deceased. The drain cover had no organic matter to indicate the presence of the body matter. Pets would never be affected, and they would sit by the main entry points and would repeatedly vocalize their discomfort until their death or rescue. Journal entry. It can see me. It knows me. Why can't it stop watching me when I am in the bathroom? I can almost see it, but part of me is so terrified of the drain. It isn't until I see it, my brain screams at me to run and to not look back. When I glance away, the fear is gone, like a switch being turned off. At least the dreams have stopped. I just want to know why I keep looking towards the bathroom, and if I was waiting for someone I hadn't seen in a long time to appear there out of nowhere. I hate this. Case file finished. There is little information that the morticians have, but all the case files read almost identically. Very few details change. The location of where the body is found, the location of the primary fear source, is always where the deceased's skin would end up. The complete lack of drain piping, lack of water usage for the location, the earliest recorded instance was 22 years ago, with all of the noted cases occurring within the United States. The assorted victims seemed to be at random. No connections could be found even with new data located upon additional victims. This would be cause for concern, but given the hundreds of case files I am still going through, indicates that there are likely to be other events as well. I had a visitor the other day. When I was taking the initial plunge past the dark web and going into the depths of the deep web, I observed an administrator for a red room who was intrigued by my fleeting visit to his site. He and some friends located me by tracking the unique data signature of the custom program I was using. They bragged about killing my friend who gave me the program. It was interesting seeing them try to intimidate me. Their smiles hidden behind masks showed me that they still suffered from an emotional range. The fight was swift, and the muscle brought along were dead at my feet. The brain was incapacitated and secured in the chair I was in previously. We had a conversation about his desire to kill me and the lengths he took. He was defiant to the end. Not that it mattered. He mentioned that he told other admins that he was tracking the one that got away, but gave no further details. I opened his veins and watched off-screen as he slowly bled to death. He wanted a show for his Red Room, a reminder of how he was a god with the power to judge the unworthy, and he had the power to decide when a life would end. He, apparently, was wrong. I smashed the camera after he died. I contacted the morticians, and they took care of the fools. There was an encounter I had not so long after getting rid of the lurkers of the dark web and his cohorts. However, it took me several days to fully comprehend the event, and to stop screaming at night. It was about 3 days after the cleanup was finished, and when there were no missing person flags matching the descriptions of the deceased, I was asked to look into a hypothetical cryptid. It didn't sound as much a request, but payment for services rendered. When I asked for any information regarding this hypothesis, the only thing known was the name: Leviathan. The resources of the Mortician Network apparently does have some limits. While they didn't have a submersible on hand, they were owed favors by people of influence. Not exact resources, but close enough for most to consider them as such. However, this favor the Morticians would be calling on was the investigation of this cryptid. A retired naval officer from a country I have been asked to not identify has reported an awareness of a monster that dwelled below the waves. Official naval protocol worldwide was to squash any reports of information regarding this cryptid, but the officer suffered from what he dubbed narcophobia. He couldn't sleep as a conscious act because he would see it again. Given the sleeping pattern he endures, the credibility of any reliable information is of the most suspect quality, but subsequent investigations found that there were others who also suffered from narcophobia, who also were in their naval equivalents, and all were part of a submarine crew. This particular eccentric witness managed to retain coherency and had become obsessed with identifying this creature. Using his knowledge and engineering skills, he crafted a small submersible that barely registered on sonar, but he needed a witness who was fresh to identify his visions. I was elected to be the witness to a madman's quest for answers. So I met the man who looked to be redefining the expression sleep-deprived, and he led me to his submersible. As I was not involved with submarines or anything nautical while in the army, I couldn't give a good approximation on the size of the vehicle. He showed me how it works in ramblings I had to endure multiple times to comprehend. Checklists were followed, food and water rations were verified, the fuel reservations were confirmed to be accurate, and we dove underwater. It took us 2 days to get to the area. I heard the same tale told over and over again for the first 14 hours. Human corpses found with giant bite marks, and no matchable mouth castings to identify the creature. Shutting the man up permanently was something I considered frequently, until he turns to me with a big smile and his declaration of how he was going to bed now, and promptly fell asleep. Our location was under the giant plastic island in the Pacific Ocean. I can't relay the latitude and longitude because I could never figure out how the thing was calculated. And for another reason you will discover shortly. I napped as well for a few hours. Upon waking up, I went to the cockpit and looked around. The retired naval officer was looking down with a grimace. One of the spotlights was locked onto a patch of coral. "Can you see it?" he asked softly. I looked at the location bathed in light for a couple of moments. Then I realized there was something hiding on top of it. Have you ever seen those photos of the man who hides in plain sight by painting himself to look like the background? This is what it was like the camouflage capabilities of the chameleon or some other creatures in the animal kingdom. It was huge, at least 80 feet in length. I had no idea how quick until a large shark got a little too close. Within a blink, and I am being literal. It went from hiding to devouring the shark, like the creature Gollum with a live fish in the Lord of the Rings movies. Except Gollum wasn't a dark brown color with 3 arms, one reaching over from behind, and the growl this thing emanated while eating shook the submersible. It was happy with the snack. The arm looked like it had been broken and allowed to fix suboptimally, causing bone warping. It had 4 legs, and they moved like a spider with half its legs, but better balance. "That's it. Leviathan," he whispered happily. Then I looked up and wished I had met a fully formed Jersey Devil. The recollections were after the fact, but one of the first things I knew was that I was screaming for almost 20 minutes, without pausing for breath. I had no idea until I was being shaken back to reality. I noticed my throat and face were sore. Apparently I had been screaming. He had tried slapping me in the face a few times to get me to stop, but to no avail. While he asked what was wrong, I just pointed to the apparition above us. It was gargantuan. It was like a mass of flesh from which tendrils dropped and spread out. At the edge were things. Monsters that defied all natural logic, but they kept shifting their forms, like the mass to which they were connected.
What are you looking at?
Words that seemed to resonate within me. I turned to face the man, but that was when I noticed that there was a face in front of the submersible. The flesh seemed to crawl, and the eyes didn't seem empty, just hungry. My mind started to scream, and I just stood there, frozen. From the files I had read, and things I had seen, there is an acceptance of fate. People who seem to know when it is their time. This thing triggered an oxymoronic sense within me. This thing was not from this world, but it belongs here. What felt like an ice pick getting slammed into my brain caused a blindingly painful migraine. When I went to move any part of my face, another ice pick of pain was slammed into me. The only thing I could move without an almost debilitating level of agony was my eyes. I was forced to stare into this creature's face, which seems to be made of creatures that should never exist in our world.
What are you looking at?
The voice asked again, and I just stared at the thing's face as it seemed to implode and withdraw back to the rest of its mass, hidden beneath the plastic convergence in the Pacific. "I think we should leave," came a voice that was actually familiar. The last thing I remember was trying to figure out what that thing sounded like, and me convulsing. I had always thought being soulless would be the greatest protection against cryptids and the like. The Jersey Devil showed me that some cryptids don't care. The Leviathan showed me that there was far more to this world than I dared to dream. I think I know why most cryptids that have to do with the ocean are quasi-humanoid. They cannot fully comprehend the thing which apparently triggered a grand mal seizure within me. I was in observation for 6 days, mainly due to the night terrors. It stared at me when I closed my eyes, and the concerning thing is, it is getting closer whenever I sleep. It turns out that the morticians have been neglecting a section of their case files from me. While I have archived some of the more known cryptids, I wasn't even aware of the subcategory until I was summoned by an incident scene. In a large field, there was one of those dopey crop circles, but the actual scene was on the edge of a neighboring forest area. I saw a young female dead, and scorched by a weapon or energy that I couldn't readily identify. And I saw an 8-foot-tall, black-skinned humanoid with a head that was larger than a normal person. Given the color of the skin and the dwindling ambient light, it was not readily apparent why this entity was there as well. Only complete lack of movement indicated that it was dead also. When it rolled over, I saw that the nose was almost non-existent, and the teeth looked more like fangs. The eye sockets appeared to be a bit larger than the victim's. Looking at this new corpse, I turned to the attending active mortician. She looked at me and sighed deeply. She pulled out a large folder. Using the light from my cell phone, I saw the case file name. Alien event. Number 0001. Civilian. I looked at the mortician, and before I could ask the obvious question, she told me the worrying answer. 813, including this incident. The file in my hands was quite thick, thicker than the others I had looked at in the past when I got my hands on the physical file. I offered to help the mortician with this incident, then I would document both. She acquiesced, and she gave me the instructions, UV lamps, and 2 gurneys. I grabbed the light stands and carried them out, positioning them in the places indicated. When they were turned on, the alien corpse glowed softly, and the injuries inflicted upon the human corpse glowed as well. Map out the crop circle, came an instruction I was not expecting. I will need exact measurements of any circles. The area would be good too. Also, total length of the whole thing as well. I paused for a moment and nodded. I had always figured out that the crop circles were bored teenagers or farmers, which, when you think about it, makes absolutely no sense. Not that they can't be man-made, but the reason for it. What would increased visitors to a farm do in terms of sale or production? I found a headlamp and a measuring tape with a spike on the end, as well as a notebook. I set about my task. It was simple, but several times I stopped. I was being watched. Something was observing me with an intent I could not identify. Looking around, I saw nothing the first 3 times, but while measuring the largest circle, I both heard and saw it. Another 8-foot, black-skinned humanoid was standing in the cornfield with me. It had partially stepped out of the corn and was partially inside the circle. Its slightly bulbous eyes had no discernible pupil. Its chest moved deeply with its breathing. We stared at each other for about 40 seconds, then it walked away. I resumed my measurements, noting them all down. 8 circles in total. 3 were quite large. While I reported the measurements to the mortician, she nodded along as I read it out loud. But she froze after I finished. I immediately looked to see if the other one was back, but there was no sight of it. When I inquired as to her freezing, she explained that there is an arrangement between their organization and the Black Ones. She then immediately refused to elaborate further. We loaded the bodies in and drove to a compound. I mentioned that I saw one of the Black Ones while measuring. Her glance seemed to be concerned. Then I had a flash of insight. You autopsy their experiments, and that was all you ever did. But with the corpse of one of them along with the experiments indicates that there is greater trouble than we're aware of, right? Things have changed, and you're unsure of how. I trailed off. How quickly can you conduct an autopsy on the Black One? I asked, my gaze peering into the side and rear-view mirror. A couple of hours. Know anything about them biologically? Weakness, capabilities, things that might be useful, just in case? Only what is reported in the first case. It is a long read. So, after I wheeled the bodies to the mortuary, I read the case file. Case file. Serial killer. Eyeless. Related topics. Black. Xenos. It is not often that we directly interfere with the lives of the regular populace. But this was one time where we were forced to act. What is not known is that before Jack the Ripper, there was another active serial killer. However, we made sure nobody knew about him. Eyeless, as he would refer to himself, was the only known surviving member of the Xeno experiments. However, since they failed to deliver his corpse, he went completely insane and started to kill people at random. The first victim was a 28-year-old dock worker, Jeremiah Langston. Little was recorded about the abduction of Jeremiah, but the only indication of anything unusual was a deranged scream about how he must be made to see. Jeremiah's body was found with an extra set of eyes inserted into wounds on his corpse. The one thing that would normally set the rumor mill ablaze was the fact that the eyes were still functional. The only other oddity, which was significantly more mundane, was that the skin was rubbed with charcoal, making it completely black. One of the attending policemen was a mortician who paled at the sight, because he didn't see the corpse as human, but as a black Xeno. He offered to escort the corpse to the morgue. Fortunately, the mortician on duty was also one of the morticians as well. They realized the problem, and they needed to do something obscene to divert any mounting public perception of the events. They knew that a killer who was putting eyes onto corpses was unlikely to stop at one, but they couldn't allow this to continue. So, the mortician who found the corpse elected to do a twofold operation. Search for the killer they sought was the obvious one, but they had to divert attention away from this as well. Many are familiar with the Jack the Ripper case. Some of you reading this may also be Ripperologists, so instead of rehashing the case, I will point out that the actual murderer was a mortician who used his police officer's skills to create the sensational kills, and to get any information about the killer he truly sought. 3 weeks. That is how long it took to find the killer the morticians sought. Did it never strike you as strange as to why the murder of prostitutes made the headlines in Victorian London? However, the killer himself was unusual. His skin was artificially black, like his victims', but he lacked the extraneous eyes his victims had. He had the right holes for the extras, but they were empty. He turns to the mortician, and he froze. They conversed for a few hours. It turns out that the black Xenos will take a human test subject and try to figure out how to get past the death problem. The Xenos would inflict countless experiments on the subject and record everything to do with the many limitations of the human body. But this man was another experiment. He was given a serum that modified his body chemistry to a point that the modern term for it is zombie. His brain function has severely limited, but judging by the bruises still evident on his skin, he had been struck by lightning, and it seems to have awakened the higher functions that had been deactivated. The zombie remembered every hellish experiment he was subjected to, and then after they neutered most of the higher functionality, was sent back to Earth. It is hypothesized that a lightning strike triggered a chemical reaction that allowed the brain to recover memories of the experiments that the zombie went through. 5 people were killed by this zombie. 5 bodies with eyes that were not connected to any ocular nerves, but still able to move. The zombie explained how he suffered repeated traumas to understand the limits of the human physiology. He was then healed afterwards, and his memories were wiped. Then the process would repeat. After the lightning strike, he would have flashes of memory, involving tall black humanoids with large eyes watching him as he would suffer significant biological trauma. This caused him to freak out and start finding his tormentors, and, in the zombie's words, make them see. After reading the case file, I looked over at the mortician. "So, you know where the mush corpses come from then?" I asked, as I walked over to her. She shot me a questioning look. Repeated significant biological trauma, like injuring someone over and over again, or killing them over and over again, I glared at her before I continued. Did you ever wonder what their true intentions were? Just because they say one thing doesn't mean they don't mean something else. For all we know, they treat their guinea pigs as science shows like they did when they performed surgeries for the rich and elite, or they use them as props in a science fair, or they're trying to figure out the most effective ways to kill us, when there are plenty of things that can easily kill us on this planet already, before we can venture into cryptid territory. I ended with a snarl. Or they are trying to remove death from us. Slaves that are weak, as humans are, would be a huge waste of time, unless they couldn't stay dead. Maybe their intentions are honest. If so, why the mush corpses? Someone is trying to send us a message, and you people are too thick to even notice that this is what's going on. It could be a test. I've noticed movement outside of my domicile lately. Normally, I would have explained it as kids trying to mess with me, or gang members trying to prove how tough they are. But given the revelations I experienced recently, my opinion is slightly more extraterrestrial. Given the apparent lack of information I was given, I spoke with the mortician who worked the more recent alien events. I asked where this organization came from. She looked at me and explained that the organization has been around for centuries, but the more formal aspects of working together across the globe came from what is referred to as the event. As soon as she spoke, she froze like a statue. I looked around, thinking that aliens had infiltrated this place, but saw nothing. Turning back, she mumbled that she could not discuss this matter further, then left abruptly. I stayed at the meeting point for a while, rereading the original study of the Dogman experiments. This will be a separate case file upload. I would have done it sooner, but I found out about the event. Eventually, I left the meeting point, and as I drove towards my home, my mind was wandering. If the interloper was not a black regalian, I tried to deduce what it could be. Skinwalker was not likely. The vocal mimicry they possess would have been audibly evident by now. Wendigos don't seem to like me. The Jersey Devil, I hope not, but the size sounds to be bigger and slower. Dogman was a possibility, but seems unlikely. Normally, dogs raise their heckles at me, so a dogman would likely attack. The rake hasn't crossed the threshold, so its modus operandi doesn't match. A friend of the Red Room admin I spoke with. That was a slight possibility. He was vocal that I wouldn't get away with this. So far, he was proven wrong. No investigation, no police. So far, anyway. People don't scare me, especially after my personal encounters with cryptids. My phone rang, jolting me out of my meditative contemplation. It was the ex-mortician. He sounded worried. He gave me a rendezvous point and a deadline. I pulled away, and as I left, I saw a crawler emerge from the thigh-high grass right next to my vehicle. 2 hours later, I was at one of the many roadside diners in the continental United States. Weapon and permits were double-checked before I entered. He sat at a booth, his eyes gazing out into a point in the middle distance. He shook his head to bring himself back as I slid in.
You wish to know more about us?
He asked. I've been working with you for a while now, and it seems there have been some important details you've missed out. I think it's time I find out the truth of your organization. Would you care to elaborate? The diner hostess approached and poured a coffee for us. We nodded in gratitude, and when I met her eyes, I saw that haunted look.
Skinwalker. Used to fish for customers every few months. After the 8th victim, we got a hunting party together. They got the cryptid.
The former mortician explained plainly. Answers that question, then. What is the event? The flinch was worrying, but I held my ground. Having traveled with this man and the cryptids we have seen,
Him reacting to anything other than the memory of his last autopsy for such a pronounced reaction, it is concerning.
You know those creepypastas about Disneyland and missing kids? He said, with a world-weary sigh. 3 centuries before Disneyland, we found items that could not be easily identified. There were no corpses, no signs of foul play, but the objects were strange. It wasn't until recently that we realized what the items were, he said, more to the table than to myself. Lanyards, with the names, ages, and addresses of children, as well as a date. But the dates were all after 1958. They are the children that have been or will be going missing from any Disney World or Disneyland amusement park. Every child. He looks at me, with a tear running down his face. The dates when they go missing. The date what's left of them are found. Once we saw the logo for the Walt Disney Company, we knew something was going to happen. Some of our number got hired by the company. They were tireless in their investigation, but it wasn't until 3 years after the first was built that the first body was found, or what was left of her. Bite marks going through her body, but upon closer inspection, there was no splintering or damage to the bones that were chomped through. The cast made of the bite was impossible. Fangs and human teeth all intermingled in the bite. It is also unfathomably large, from what we can calculate. Apart from the fact that large pieces of her are missing, there is no evidence of a bite other than the imprint. The ribs we could get were pristine, other than the fact that the rib cage and most of her spine is missing. No splintering or damage, no evidence of surgery. It is impossible, and you know what we have seen on our jobs. Naturally, the company was able to keep the families of those missing quiet. The methods of morticians are forbidden from discussing. We get the right to examine the remains, but all results have been identical. No extraneous damage, no post-mortem bruising, just dead children and too many questions. Though we do have a hypothesis, or rather, it is more of a philosophical musing. Ever notice how comedians seem to suffer from depression? It is like they carry such a darkness within themselves that they try to bring joy and laughter to others. If this truly is the case, what darkness lurks within the amusement parks run by Walt Disney? We sip our coffee as we ponder a question that seems too impossible to be real. I would love to immediately refute these claims, but with the cryptids I have personally encountered and the cases I have read, I honestly cannot.
Wanna party, handsome?
A voice slurs out the front of the diner. I sit up and look around. There are 4 people that should be here. Myself, the former mortician, the hostess, and the cook. No extra vehicles were here on arrival. No other patrons were here. So who the hell is trying to proposition us?
Wanna party, handsome?
The voice repeats, precisely. A shriek forces me into action. The hostess drops the glass pot of coffee and shrieks again. As I stand up, I look outside to see a rotting animal standing up on its hind legs, looking at least 12 feet tall. A skinwalker. Get them out of here, I roar. Its gaze shifts between me and the mortician, who is pushing the hostess towards the back. Another voice can barely be heard. I am not sure, but it sounds like a reply to the skinwalker's hook.
Let's party.
This is the song that never ends. Yes, it goes on and on, my friend. Some people start singing it, not knowing what it was, and they'll never stop singing it forever, just because. This is the song that never ends. I sang softly, while watching the skinwalker out the front. I nodded deliberately at the former mortician who started singing it. He seems to hesitate like he felt foolish for singing a child's song. Sing the song. These things hunt by fear. The song will distract you, but only if you sing it. Don't stop singing, I tell the hostess slowly. Walking slowly to the serving area, I call to the cook. I want you to join us out here and sing that song, I say, not breaking eye contact.
Let's party,
Came the response, the exact response. Drawing my gun, I stepped away from the serving area. I'm going to distract them. You get to his car and leave. They nodded, but kept singing, though the hostess was visibly paler. Pulling out my gun, I decided to draw upon the experience of the Jersey Devil encounter. I needed to feel fear, and nothing on this planet filled me with more fear than that monster. I pointed the gun directly down and fired. The bullet slammed into my foot, and I felt some of the bones break. Bleeding, lame, and feeling scared. Hopefully the perfect bait for these predators. Now! I roar, while shooting out a window near to me, so I can jump out as best as I could. The pain was excruciating, but the presence of the skinwalkers was a very motivating factor. Limping, I made it to the window. As the skinwalker out the front walked over to me, its rotten flesh seems to absorb the light from the diner.
let's party.
Came that voice again, as I landed outside and grunted in pain. Fear from the Jersey Devil began to exude from me. I forced myself to move fast, but each step on my wounded foot was like standing on a ball of hot lead. Rapid movement from behind me was my only warning. I dove to the side as the skinwalker charged at me, its foot hitting my injured one. I never felt such agony before. I could hear car doors closing. The second skinwalker was visible now when it crawled through the window. Its rotten meat seems to hang from the bones as it stared towards me. Its grin stretched beyond the realm nature indicated on the head it currently had. Its jaw opened, and I could hear it replicate a scream of terror. I started to run, but the damage to my foot slowed me down. The car engine revved somewhere in the parking lot, and I could hear the tire squeal in protest as the former mortician and hostess raced to safety. Limping as fast as I could, I saw the second skinwalker emerge from the cafe. It was even longer than the first. I briefly considered how my mind would have reacted to these unnatural monstrosities if I hadn't encountered the Leviathan. Something shifts in the atmosphere when my mind brushes against that memory. The predatory beasts pause. They glance at each other, then charge at me. Fear is no longer useful. It has served its purpose. What I need is fury. White, cold fury. I charge at the apparitions and roll under the swiping claws of the closest creature. Pushing off of my wounded foot, I spring up and let the pain fuel me with adrenaline. Fire is a good weapon against the supernatural, and while I cannot throw it, I pray this diner has gas stoves. Screeches that threatened to scratch my eardrums to shreds burst forth from their ravenous maws. Scrambling as they follow, I dive through the serving window, crashing to the ground. I look up and see that the stoves are gas. Clawing my way up, while the skinwalkers stalk towards me, I pull at the stove. With a grunt, I can feel it start to give. Then I almost hit my head on the stove. I turn on the valves, gas hissing away. I grab 2 knives while I slip my gun into my holster. Control. That word is my anchor. While the pain fills me with adrenaline, one stupid mistake will get me killed. I need to stay in control, but angry enough to give my attacks more power. They stalk a different side of the kitchen island towards me. Skilled and trained predatory tactics. I throw one knife at the furthest monster, but the blade doesn't get much purchase against the rotten meat. I back up to the door, and I can see them smiling at me. Patience, not a common mental trait of monsters. By now, I am almost at the door, and they are blocking my view of the kitchen. I can't run. They will catch me in a heartbeat, or whenever they want to. I can't shoot the oven to trigger a spark and, hopefully, an explosion. But I do see a microwave. I draw and fire 3 shots. The first misses, the second one connects, and sparks fly from the electric device. I don't hear the third shot due to the explosion and the shrieking. The shockwave throws me through the doorway, and I land on the asphalt. The screeching tires a higher pitch as I roll over and look at the 2 skinwalkers, who are still standing. And I walk towards me. I force myself up and start to limp into the forest. I can hear them stalk towards me, and I am too sore to continue fighting. Glancing back as I made my way through the forest, I can see their engulfed bodies. A loud crack causes me to flinch. Turning around, I only see one walking, flaming corpse. That too crashes to the ground. A piercing howl seems to actually tear the night sky apart. Then silence returns. I eventually made it to a main road, where I met a strike team dispatched by the morticians. I debriefed them, while they took me to a trusted vet. I apologize for the delayed update, but I have been trying to recover, but my dreams feature those 2 skinwalkers with heightened prevalence. While recuperating from the self-inflicted gunshot wound, I decided to resume my actual duties as an archivist for the Mortician Network. I noticed an odd assortment of cases spread across multiple cities, each with varying numbers in each location. Case file. Sewer inhabitant. NYC. Number 01386. Preliminary details are small due to what was left of the body outside a storm sewer grate on the outskirts of Manhattan. Most of a right hand, bearing telltale signs of tattoos, and a tan are the immediate identifying features. No rings adorn the hand, and the fingerprints have turned up nothing on any criminal database. It is likely that this is one of the many missing homeless people in New York City. However, due to lack of a body or location where the victim was last seen, any further detail is currently speculation, unless we ask the entire homeless population if the photograph of this hand looks familiar. Body part was found in 06/02/2010. Case file. Sewer inhabitants. NYC. Number 0068. Preliminary details are more substantial, as a large pair of the torso and upper thighs were relatively undamaged when removed from a sewer junction when discovered. Autopsy indicates the presence of claws and sharpened fangs were used to remove the flesh from the bone. Trace amounts of DNA indicate a human variation. DNA mapping indicates that this variant is smaller than the average human. The skin would be scaly like a lizard, as the creature is cold-blooded. No mappable bone structure, but hardened cartilage is theorized to allow movement. The eyes seems to allow vision in low or no light, with an aversion to powerful light. Clothing remnants indicates that this was a subcontractor for the city. Partial tattoos allowed for easier identification as a reformed gang member. The victim was reported as being missing for approximately 3 weeks, in comparison to estimated time of death. Partial data recovery from destroyed cellular phone have the estimated date and time of death. Vague witness reports indicate heightened noise pollution from the sewer. One witness was walking along the streets on the same day of death, advised that there was no ambient noise from any animals in the area. While motor vehicles could be audibly identified, there were no birds chirping or insect background noise. No other abnormalities were noticed by the witness. Case file. Sewer inhabitant. Paris. Number 0013. Mauled body of an urban explorer found outside an entrance to the Parisian sewer system. No traces of DNA despite the evidence of the similar wounds found on other victims killed in sewer systems around the world. Given the likelihood this urban explorer was originally delving into the Paris catacombs,
No further investigation is to occur. When I started to look after case files pertaining to the Parisian catacombs, the only comments regarding these were, "Please refer to the hand copies locked away in a safe place." There are over 913 case files with dates going back decades. I will be speaking with the morticians once I have healed up more. The hostess from the bar is seeing one of the therapists who have dealt with those who survived an encounter with the paranormal, as she was traumatized by the situation. A situation I can understand, since encountering the Jersey Devil. There was a few camera feeds of maintenance workers going into the sewer systems. Most are like the end to the Blair Witch, the potential to be shocked, but ultimately a giant anticlimax. But one did catch my attention, not from a maintenance worker, but by a wealthy urban explorer who spent a significant amount on his gear, including a wireless transmitter that could penetrate the ground well enough to send the footage to a black box recording device. This included audio as well. I will include a transcription of relevant audio. Case file. Sewer inhabitant. Detroit. Number 01499. Bloodstained camera and shattered pieces of head found outside a storm sewer entry point. Camera appears to be a GoPro with aftermarket antenna modifications to allow greater transmission power and clarity. Network tracing allowed investigators to locate a black box setup at the home of a citizen in the socioeconomic bracket of the upper class. Name has been redacted due to the complicated history this family has with the paranormal. Owner of the camera was reported as missing, and the remains were found 3 weeks after the initial complaint. The official answer given to the family is that the child was kidnapped and killed via a red room on the dark web. Footage has been created to illuminate this, should they ever ask to see the footage. The recording was examined and copied to the corresponding case file. Video and audio clip. The initial start is a voiceover of the urban explorer introducing himself with his Urbex handle. He states that he was wanting to explore the storm sewers around Detroit because he believes it was just like the video game series Infamous on the PlayStation consoles. He approaches a large intake and enters. He describes the surprising amount of research he did into this, and he comments on past excursions he conducted. He walks for about 15 minutes before he freezes. Audio.
Did you hear that? Sounds like something was scratching the wall.
Video. The urbexer looks behind him slowly, the headlight revealing nothing in the corridor behind him. Turning back, he doesn't seem to notice that there is something ahead which draws further into the darkness. Judging by the lack of commentary from the urbexer, it seems unlikely he did not see the creature. Using the alternate methods that were also being recorded due to the high-quality camera, night vision reveals the presence of 3 short humanoids with very long arms and very short legs. As the urbexer creeps forward, the 3 creatures move backwards, but the movement seems odd, more fluid than normal. Audio.
Hope I don't run into any mole people down here. A mole person is a derogatory term used to describe people who live underground. Probably better than Morlock from the Time Machine, though.
Video. He explores a little further and arrives at the intersection. Periodic checks of the night vision mode reveals that the sewer inhabitants split up at the intersection. The only likely safe path is for him to return home, but he doesn't seem to be aware. He looks down each corridor and he is silent again. He seems to be trying to listen for something. Audio. In the distance, water drips. There is no other ambient noise other than the breathing of the urbexer. Then, there is a high-pitched shriek. Video and audio. The urbexer swears and charges straight ahead. His panting echoes off the walls around him. He looks back, and in the bouncing headlight, he can see the sewer inhabitants. He turns to face in front of him, but slams into a wall he didn't see. He crashes heavily to the ground. There is no movement from the camera, and I suspect that he knocked himself out. However, the video shows him trying to move, and a soft groan which is drowned out by the scrabbling of claws on the ground. He rolls over to his back and starts to sit up. Video and audio. The inhabitants approach, the light shining off their eyes. The way the arms bend indicates that the arms are cartilage-based, rather than a skeletal system. A swipe from an arm of an inhabitant knocks the lights and camera off the urbexer's head. Contrary to popular horror tropes, the camera doesn't land in a way that shows the carnage that is audible. The screams last for approximately 39 minutes, before the assumed death of the urbexer. That camera records for another several hours before powering off. It is unknown how the camera appeared at the entrance where it was located. As I went through the hundreds of cases from around the world, including Russia, which is unusual as they never shared any other case files that I had seen, I became concerned about what these creatures were. Other than man-eaters, their movements, from what I could see, were weirdly fluid, and the skeletal structure, as previously mentioned, seemed to be more focused on cartilage than actual bone. The only thing that struck me as off in all of these cases were the ones based in Paris. 5 recorded deaths with autopsies performed on what was left, but there was a disconcerting amount of references to the Parisian catacombs, and very emphatic warnings to stay away. Since I got a regular visitor in the form of the retired mortician, I decided to bring it up with him when I next saw him. Closing down my connection to the Deepweb, I hear a knock on my door. As I answer it, I noticed something very unusual. There is no white noise at all, no hum of electronics or anything like that. As I opened the door, I saw no one, until I turned around. A black regalian stood there, slightly hunched over, and looking directly at me. Seeing the regalian in front of me, I was taken aback. I certainly was not expecting a member of an alien race that does not experiment on humans to be in my home. It stands there like in those movies, waits mainly on one leg, as if peering around a corner, except he is in my hallway. "Why are you here?" "Hello," it said, uncertainly. I repeated the question, and it paused for a moment and said, "Hello." "I'm sorry," it said, before I could respond. This put me on the defensive, as these seemed to be the reason for the mush corpses. Having a dialogue, even this unusual, seemed to hold my interest for my health in good standing. Next thing I know, I'm getting flashes in my mind, like someone is somehow psychologically slamming a slideshow into my mind. Trees, but not ones I expected to see. Rainforests, perhaps. Another image. This one is more chaotic. Flashes of movement. Barely there are glimpses of what I believe are faces. More images of something likely in the woods. Sounds can be heard. Screaming, begging. Mercy is being requested. Whimpering. What can be understated as a migraine decides to set up a blog dancing competition with the global supply of elephants on my brain would cause a quieter noise than the pounding my head is forcing me to endure. I see black regalians standing around, looking over their shoulder, with long coats on. They are smiling, for lack of a better word. Though it seems more leering, there is an undercurrent of an emotion that I cannot quite comprehend. "Sorry," it says again. I still cannot figure out what it is trying to convey. Another flood of images. Half-man monster creatures in bad makeup running around a movie set. Then it clicks. "You turned humans into monsters, didn't you?" I whisper. "Me? No. Others, yes.
It stated simply. I could feel a deep sense of violation at this statement. No, not the statement. The complete lack of inflection. It didn't feel bad for what the others did to another race. But then I remembered that I was educated on empathy. Any damage I incurred, regardless of intention, my parents would sit me down and discuss it with me in great detail. My intentions toward the objects or the occasional house pet whose corpse they found. After the 6th cat, I asked why they did this, and they explained that due to my lack of emotions, they come to understand that I do not understand the emotional impact of my actions. They told me how other people would view my actions and see me as a monster. While my intention was never to commit harm to another person, when the cat annoyed me too much, I would kill it. Perhaps this alien is like me. No emotional awareness. While parts of me still burned at the thought of their actions, I decided to understand the intent. Why? I asked. What would cause you to turn the humans you get into monsters? Images flooded my mind, but these were very familiar. It was Sid's bedroom in Toy Story. The focus was on Sid causing harm to the toys with malicious glee, and then they see him put them back together in ways he found entertaining. We are mere playthings to them, toys to pull apart and pull back together however they want. Bile rises in my throat, and I force it back down. That ember of rage was roaring into an inferno. I wanted to slam my fists into that regalian over and over again, until I turned into a black smear on my carpet. When I stood up, after the visions drove me to my knees, it took a step back. It recognized the danger it was in. Its hands were lifted slightly, like a person would do to try and placate a predator. Then, the emotions were gone. You're going to tell us how many you turned, and into what? Then you will tell us why you made contact with me, I declared in a whisper. My phone rang. I answered it. The ex-mortician greeted me and wanted to visit. Now would be a perfect time. Then bring a voice recorder. There's a conversation we need to have, I say, my eyes fixed on the regalian. The rage hadn't truly dissipated, but it wasn't trying to overtake my conscious action. What human foods can you consume safely? Not French toast, it said, while giving me an image of French toast in my head. Any human liquids? Water. You seem to be aware of some societal protocols. I expect you will be following along, as it is not a direct violation of your own, I said, as I walked to the kitchen. 25 minutes later, I had finished making the French toast and was carrying it to the black regalian and the stunned ex-mortician who were at my dining table. The recorder was turned on and we started our meal. What monsters did you create? The ex-mortician asked, his eyes glancing to me once to see if he had permission to speak. Vampire, Therian, Arachne, Minotaur, Satyr, animal-headed human from place with lots of sand. Others, mainly humanish ones. Others were too difficult and dead. Arachne from ancient Greek lore. You turned a human woman into a spider. Woman with no limbs. Broken toy when we found her. Gave her twice as many limbs. Removed tongue to stop loud noises. The ex-mortician and I froze in shock at this. Not much left to do to finish, it said simply. Why? The ex-mortician asked. I closed my eyes and explained my conversation with my guest before he called. The ex-mortician started to shake with rage. I glared at him and told him to calm down. He started to yell at me when I pointed out two obvious facts. The first fact was that the Black Regalian has taken the time to study our culture more to facilitate communications to confess the actions of his people. The second fact was he clearly wanted to warn us about something, because there would be no other reason for him to break into my house for no reason. Why are you here? Why have you come to me? As I tried to understand the emotions and the inflections people use to express them, there are things you notice. That pause before someone drops a huge truth that would shake the worldview of the listeners. I'm not sure if it's learned behavior the Regalian picked up on during its consumption of media, or if it performed it instinctively. You came to warn us? Your people are trying to, what, enslave humanity? No, not enslave, so much as to change us into the monsters of our fiction, because you think it would be fun? I asked, my mouth slightly agape. It looks at me, then nods. They were going to release the one you don't know about against you all. You likely wouldn't live too long. I can't help, I said, after a long pause. I had considered it, but given my recent injury and the archiving still ahead of me, it would be irresponsible for me to go. You need a warrior, not a soldier, but a natural-born warrior. If you can find one who would be suitable, I will help you convince them. But this is not my war. I've been dragged into the cryptids native to this planet. It walks out of the lounge and into the hallway, closing the door behind it. I walk to the door and pull it open, revealing the hallway it had stepped into, and nothing else. The ex-mortician steps up next to me, and mutters in surprise that the Regalian is no longer there. I let the door swing close, and step away. You really going to do nothing? He asks softly. I've already explained why I'm not the right choice. I'm not going to repeat myself, I answered calmly. Sitting at my small dining table, I wonder how it knew how to find me. The ex-mortician walked over. Carefully, he watched me as I just sat there for a few minutes. So, did you come over for a reason in particular? Look, you injured yourself to lure those skinwalkers away. I just wanted to make sure you were okay. I will be fine. I was just going to archive some more cases. Hopefully have a little less action in my life for a while, I said as I grabbed my laptop, coffee, and a few other implements. What case files are you going to be looking at this time? The ex-mortician called out. Mimics, or suspected mimics. Oh, that can be messy. Case file. Mimic confirmed. Elevator. Tokyo, Japan. In the month of November, a confirmed mimic was located in an apartment building in Tokyo, Japan. The case that brought this to the attention of the network was the 11th confirmed missing person involving a tenant at this building. A young male, aged 24 years old, was seen entering the elevator, and he was not seen since. An investigating officer noted the other missing people and spoke his intentions to a private investigator known to investigate the unusual. This PI is a known network operative. He was about to get the suspected elevator shut down for a period of 3 days under the guise of maintenance. The first day was spent on research and tracking down the footage involving the other victims. He was able to locate the corresponding shaft. On the second day, he confirmed the presence of a mimic copying an elevator car. Since the mimic had recently fed, it wasn't active in its consumption. However, as the PI suspected a mimic's involvement, he was able to quickly confirm it. That night, he used an accelerant infused with metallic shards and a lighter to remove the mimic's seed. He then entered the shaft and killed the mimic nest, which was located at the top of the elevator shaft. The damage caused to the actual elevator engine at the top was approximately 20 million yen. The corpses were never recovered. Case file. Mimic confirmed. Escalator, Colorado, USA. At an abandoned shopping mall located in the state of Colorado, urban explorers were searching through the complex. One had split off from the group and was walking along an escalator. The attached video footage, located on the Mortician's network, showed what happened. The young explorer was walking along until they reached about 1/3 of the way along. Suddenly, they ceased walking, though it was evidence that they were trying to move. As they looked around, they started to resume a forward motion as if the escalator was working again. When they noticed the unusual activity, they looked ahead at what appeared to be a mouth that looked like the combination of a Sarlacc from the Star Wars setting and a Venus flytrap. The explorer started yelling loudly, but none of the others seemed to notice. The explorer was consumed slowly. While the death was a tragedy, there were two things of note regarding this case. The complex had no active utilities at all, so how the security camera was working is relatively unknown. Also, 5 hours after the explorer vanished, the mall was burned to the ground. Police and fire service were unable to locate anything related to arson or anything that could cause the mall to be burned to ash. This part of the case file is still active. Case file. Mimic suspected. Elevator. China. This information was smuggled out of mainland China by an operative who passed away shortly after delivery. 300 video clips were on the thumb drive, all of them almost identical in footage. A different person was seen in each video file, but they were all the only one on a seemingly malfunctioning elevator, and they all got stuck, and through machinations that are unknown, all of their heads were removed violently. Accompanying text files indicated that there was never any blood or bodies found in any of the kill sites. Given the strict information control the Chinese government has over the people, there is no way we can communicate with our network resources over there, as they are still hunting for the network in the Deepweb. There is a smaller text file, which indicates that mimics might be evolving to more mobile forms. Abandoned cars on the side of the road seemed to be a common suspicion of mimics. Also, theories or suspicions that they are working with other cryptids. After disconnecting my laptop from the Deepweb, I stand up and stretch. There was a lot of information to go through, and sitting hunched over my computer took a toll. As I finished my stretch, I noticed something concerning. Shadows seemed to be darker. Light in general seems to be slowly fading away. Grabbing my pistol, I carefully made my way until I discover the problem. The ex-mortician sits next to a cryptid that I never expected to see. Sitting there, like a gangly lupine, the rake sits there. Its pale skin almost seems to glow. Its empty eyes stare at me, and I hear a scratchy voice speak in my mind.
Threat.
I aim my weapon at the cryptid, when the ex-mortician shakes his head.
He's my friend. He is the rake.
He struggles to speak, like his words are escaping quicksand. What brings you here? I ask.
Help.
It replies, verbally. This will be my final case, archival or otherwise. The investigation I have conducted when I arrived at the forest has led me to the foregone conclusion that I will never be able to return to my home or the Mortician's network, except as another case file. I would like to thank everyone who has enjoyed my work, and I hope that someone else is able to find that network, as there is still so much more to archive, and I appreciate the interest in my work. As I mentioned earlier, the ex-mortician has become a vassal of the rake that appeared in my apartment. I grabbed my survival gear, as the rake had asked for help. A sentence I never thought I would have to write. The rake disappeared, but I was still aware of its presence, like a spike thrust into my skull. The ex-mortician and I drove to a national forest, following the blur that was the rake, as it herded my driving to where it wanted. Retrieving my gear I collected, I start my slow hike through the woods. The rake, my guide. It didn't like me being slow, but given that I was still recovering from my gunshot there, speed was not a factor I could contribute to for long stretches of time. The ex-mortician was silent throughout this entire enterprise, which wasn't a shock to me. For miles, we trekked through the woods, which had an odd sense to them. It was like being wrapped in a blanket of warmth and stinging needles. Pleasant, but painful. As we got closer to where the rake was leading us, I stopped. I remember being briefly stationed in a U.S. base, secreted within the Russian wilderness. It was only for a few weeks, but I could barely remember it. And now I know why. The U.S. base was small, barely bigger than the base that was overrun, possibly by doppelgangers. Small number of personnel meant fewer resources and lower amounts of equipment, which further equates to less chance of being spotted. But what the Pentagon failed to take into consideration was the presence of other beings on this planet, whose existence is either redacted, blatantly disregarded, or met with dismissive hostility. As documented in my earlier case files, we are not alone on this planet. From known cryptids to whatever did that to that town centuries ago. But most folklore is restricted to particular regions of the world. Or so we have been led to believe. One of the main infamous cryptids/monsters of folklore in Russia is Baba Yaga, the Russian version of Witch in the Woods. Whether she will help or hinder are based on factors I will never figure out. But looking at what I was seeing in front of us in a national forest in the USA, I remembered my encounter with Baba Yaga in Russia, including its walking house on bird legs. I was on a routine path within 12 hours of my arrival at the Russian forward scouting base. Patrols were random and executed by one person. I was patrolling at 0419 when it arrived. I felt a shift in the forest, but at the time was not aware of the Baba Yaga who ruled the forest we were in. I was 12 minutes into my patrol when I walked out of a mist that appeared out of nowhere. The only other thing of note at the time was I had a resounding headache, but I persevered. This house descended towards me slowly, and I became aware of the attention I was being burdened with. The legs crouched down, and the door opened when it got low enough. A woman stood there, her features seeming to shift like a mirage. The features went from attractive to repulsive, but they never seemed to settle. All it seemed to do was compound my headache. Baba Yaga greeted me and beckoned me to enter her hut. While my commanding officer likely would have disagreed with me, I hoped the change of scenery would diminish my pounding headache. I agreed that I would, but I was unable to step up to the hut as it was still a good 15 feet in the air. "Take the stairs," was the response as a staircase appeared before me. Carefully, I strode up and entered this hut. Once crossing the threshold, my headache was gone, and I thanked the woman for her hospitality. She thanked me for the courtesy, saying I was a nice young man. Then the side of me I had been under control since a child started to rise up. It was something I had made myself aware of so I could maintain control. But here it was, like a cobra, poised to strike. The woman didn't seem to pay any mind as I fought for control of my own body. That part I had kept controlled wanted to shoot the woman, but I was able to keep control. As soon as I ejected the magazine and thrust my weapon away, she turned to me and smirked. I was suddenly very aware of the predicaments I had blundered into. She seemed to notice, and noted that I was a smart boy. Then her eyes seemed to soften. "But a broken boy, too," she said softly. She stepped towards me, then hissed.
"An empty boy, void-stricken."
Next thing I was consciously aware of was I was being shipped off home. But one thing I did overhear before I left was there was another set of incomplete stairs in the woods.
And now I see another set of incomplete stairs in this forest. And what is worse is I see a chicken-legged hut. Dead. As I approach the legs, I can see that they are wooden, and somehow blood was oozing from the wounds inflicted upon them. Walking the 30 feet to get to the capsized hut, I can see military uniforms, but the creatures in them are not human. Dogmen, German shepherds, and a couple of bloodhounds by the looks. They were dead. There was a mass of grey flesh, next to which stood the rake. It looked at me, and I felt a crushing sadness within me.
Too late. Mistress is dead.
It sounded within my head. It walked up to the ex-mortician and with a casual swipe of its claws, sliced his stomach wide open. He slumped to the ground and just lay there as the rake ate him. The dogmen were wearing military dog tags, but I didn't recognize the names. I was unsure of what to do, or if the rake would eat me next. Suddenly, a loud crashing noise ripped through the air. The hut had flipped upside down and was sinking into the ground, as was the mass that must have been the Baba Yaga. The staircase shuddered for a moment before collapsing, then rebuilding itself upside down. I remember listening to the encounters people have had with the stairs in the forest, and how they felt creeped out by them, or the superstitions surrounding them. Then I knew. Baba Yaga was here, and brought her sisters with her. They lived within hundreds of miles of forest. Some of those cryptid encounters were likely victims of Baba Yaga who had insulted them, so the Baba Yaga sought retribution. They would curse those humans and force them to live how they were changed. Then I turned to the rake. That's how you came to be, isn't it? You each belong to a Baba Yaga, like a faithful companion, I say, as I turn to the rake as it finishes consuming. It nodded once and stared at me. A thudding noise boomed in the distance, and it is starting to come closer. Another Baba Yaga is coming to see her fallen sister, and I doubt the rake will let me leave. So, like I said, this is my final archive. I appreciated the enormity of the task that once laid before me, but I do not think I will be able to return to it. So that is likely my final request. If you can, please find the Mortician's network and continue what was once my task.
Automated message. Hello, Harold. If you're reading this, I'm either dead or have been missing for over 7 months. As you had backdoor access into the program I used for browsing the Deepweb, I figure you have read into my case files. I'm sorry I was unable to inform you of this, but I think you will understand why I decided to not inform you. But since this is likely my last report, this will be more observation than fact. But the spiderweb of deceit in regards to cryptids and related fatalities is surprising from what I have been able to ascertain. Something I've noticed is 4chan. Regarded in a non-positive light, I found it unusual that some of the monsters were created on that site. Making a monster is how it was referred to. And given the photos they apparently photoshopped and otherwise manipulated, those images are not as doctored as we have been led to believe. The creatures are actually there, but because they doctor over the photo subject, it indicates that the creature is a creation. The reason why I find this odd is the fact that 4chan has been cited as a resource for the mainstream for larger new stories. However, as previously referred, 4chan is not that reputable. But the elevation the website has gained when used as a reference point, it struck me as odd. Unless it is part of a misdirection campaign, which is what I theorize. Missing 411 is intriguing as there are some correlation between bodies examined and cases referenced.
but there doesn't seem to be anyone trying to shut it down, though that is more likely due to internet discourse. But the few attempts to besmirch the person who is following these cases have not been very successful. I am well aware of how this sounds, like a conspiracy dreamed up by people with low IQs and a hidden puppet complex. But there is only one piece of this puzzle: fear. It is easier to mischaracterize these as animal attacks, or they just wandered off, any excuse to hand-wave the unusual or downright bizarre. Local papers won't admit that search and rescue officers have no clue, despite following the evidence, because the outcome doesn't work. They follow the tracks, the logical progressions in logic, but no clues or conclusions are encountered. As you can reasonably conclude, there are a fair amount of missing 411 bodies that have been autopsied and catalogued. As my final archival entry, I will include two below. One with cryptid involvement, the other is just unexplainable. 411 corpse. Confirmed cryptid involvement. In 1938, the individual involved disappeared from a family excursion throughout a location that is not to be disclosed given the nature of the cryptid involvement. After the requisite searches, the individual was deemed lost, though the family never gave up hope. What is not known to the family is that a dryad abducted the individual. The boy would never be found alive. In 1996, a hiker with ties to the morticians stumbles upon the body of the missing individual. Dryads capture young children, though typically they have another cryptid do the abducting for them. That does not seem to be the case in this situation. The individual did not age a single day, even after death. The capabilities of dryads are not very well known, as encounters with them are exceedingly rare. However, there is a record of an autopsy conducted on a dryad. Cryptid autopsy. Dryad. Age unknown. Name unknown. The specimen is measured at 5 feet and 6 inches in height. Her complexion appears tan, but closer inspection indicates that the skin is actually very fine bark, which is sturdier than normal tree bark. Incisions with regular equipment is virtually impossible, and typical cryptid countermeasures fail to inflict any impact. Woodworking equipment was brought in and a rudimentary autopsy was given, but the equipment required frequent repairs due to overheating of the engines or blunting of the blades involved. While the specimen is humanoid, the weight is significantly higher than originally suspected. 438 pounds of mass compressed into an athletic build. No digestive organs could be discerned, but analysis of the hair fibers indicated some form of moss, which gives weight to a photosynthesis style of nourishment. Musculature almost seems human, except appears to be constructed of wood. It is nearly impossible to gauge physical capabilities, as at the time of death, the wood appears to have hardened. No skeletal system, as traditionally seen, though some form of human exoskeleton can be deduced from thin but extremely durable branches throughout the sample's body. With no digestive tract, it is impossible to deduce if these cryptids require other forms of nutrition or if they eat for any other reason. The discovery of this sample was borderline miraculous. A solo hiker happens to overhear a Gaelic phrase being recited where the body was discovered. Intrigued at recognizing the language, but confused as to the intent. The hiker tried to administer first aid, but found the skin and musculature too rigid to budge. The weight was far more than what the hiker was prepared to contend with, so made a call via satellite phone. Anomalous phrases triggered mortician protocol, and an asset was dispatched from the local area to assist the hiker. During the statement given, the Scottish tourist explained that they heard a Gaelic phrase being repeated in a slow tone. Wood for life, youth from the young. It struck the hiker as some odd druid phrase, but was unable to conclude any solid connection. The asset reported that he felt observed while he moved the body himself to a mortician transports after the hiker gave his statement. 411 body. Suspected cryptid involvement.
Anomalous behavior confirmed. This one is odd for a fair amount of reasons. While the identity wasn't initially confirmed, the body was able to provide answers that could be verified through other means. The body was seen prone in a clearing during another S&R operation. The person who located the body reported it to his quadrant supervisor. The regular mortician who conducted the autopsy of the body, who was not the intended target, noted a complete lack of human organs, along with no apparent cause of death. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary except for the lack of brains, heart, liver, and lungs. No signs of deterioration and no indications of forced removal. The organs were simply not there. It wasn't until the coroner mused aloud the identity of the corpse that it sat up. Suspecting this may have been an involuntary reaction, the doctor seemed to sense something odd about the situation. It just didn't feel right. The coroner asked one question to the corpse before contacting the network. "Do you know how you died?" The corpse nodded in response. Once the coroners took over the case with an appropriate dummy corpse, the coroner selected for this body questioned the body after determining that it could only answer closed questions. Over several hours, the following information was obtained. The person went missing in 1791. He was with friends and family. He was not from the woods where his body was found. He was called away by something. He knows he has a name, but he does not know what it is. He was Native American. He knew that his friends and family were looking for him. He was unable to reach out to them. He does not know why that was. He doesn't remember eating after his disappearance. He has not been able to contact any other human being until his body was allowed to be recovered. He knows that something made him into what he currently is, but he is not able to identify it. After the long interview, this body was walking slowly to the 411th wing and placed with the 43 other bodies to stand there until further questioning. I'm sorry I was no longer able to provide further additions to my archival work. So this is my way of passing on the baton. Whether you decide to pick it up, Harold, is entirely up to you.